Hello everyone, I know you are going to use this video for falling asleep, so before that, like this video, subscribe to the channel and let me know where you are from. Also, what time is it? It started with a scream, not a distant cry for help, or the kind of scream you'd hear in horror movies. This was guttural, close, and soaked in terror so raw, it pierced the air like a jagged blade. It erupted during a live stream, late at night, from a small town radio station that no one outside of Marowak ever talked about. WZRD 99.1 FM, the Night Tower, was one of those relics from the analog days, old tapes, dusty soundboards, and a DJ who still refused to play anything recorded after 1997. The station ran from an old lighthouse on the edge of Hollow Cliff, a battered structure long decommissioned from maritime use. But the tower still stood tall and unblinking, broadcasting into the night for the insomniacs, the conspiracy junkies, and the lonely. The scream cut through a live call, in segment hosted by Elijah Crown, a man known for his cigarette, rough voice, and taste for midnight legends. He ran the Gravelines, where listeners shared encounters with the bizarre. But on that night, Elijah didn't get a story, he got a warning. And then, he got silence. The station went dark. Not a glitch, not static, just gone. No backup broadcast, no emergency message, no follow-up, just void. What made this more than just another urban legend was what happened next. 3 days after the scream, local police entered the tower to find the equipment still powered, mic on, tape running. But Elijah was nowhere. There was no sign of forced entry. No struggle, nothing. Just a single word scrawled on the soundproof walls of the booth, written over and over in thick, black marker. Don't listen. But here's the part that never made it past forums and message boards. A 12-minute audio file, ripped from the last broadcast, began circulating days later. No one knows who uploaded it. Some say it was leaked from the police. Others think it was the tower itself, still reaching out. The file has been re-uploaded countless times, but each version warps slightly more. The pitch shifts, the background changes, but the scream stays. And people started going missing, not all at once. One here, another there. All of them had one thing in common: they'd played the recording out loud, not through headphones or speakers, but through radio transceivers, ham radios, anything analog. The strange part: their houses always smelled like salt water. This is the part I didn't want to believe, until it happened to my brother. Liam was a quiet guy, tinkerer, obsessed with old tech, VHS tapes, shortwave radios, anything he could pull from a junkyard and bring back to life. I came home one night to find his room covered in diagrams, red string maps, post-it notes that looked like madness at first glance, but on closer inspection formed a trail. All of it pointing to the same phrase: WZRD is a mouth. That same night, I found his makeshift antenna on the roof, a portable generator humming beside it. He'd hooked it up to a reel player, ready to transmit. There was a note pinned to the wall, held in place with a switchblade. If I scream, cut the signal. He never screamed, just silence. By the time I climbed to the roof, the tape was still spinning. But Liam was gone. No signs of a struggle. No footprints. Just a patch of wet salt crusting over the edge of the tiles, like the ocean had reached up and touched the roof. That's when I knew this wasn't just a myth. And if you think this is just an urban legend, a creepypasta gone too far, ask yourself why WZRD was never officially listed as a registered station. Yet its frequency could still be picked up late at night, just past the static. Ask yourself why people across different states, sometimes even countries, have heard the same chilling whisper when they scan to 99.1 after midnight. The whisper that always begins with your name. I wasn't planning to investigate. I had a good job, a fiancé, a life. But grief makes you stupid. Grief makes you brave, or maybe both. Because 2 days later, I drove to Marowak with nothing but Liam's notes and a growing sense that none of this was ever meant to be uncovered. Marowak isn't on most maps. You have to look for it. Deep in the folds of eastern Maine, hidden behind thickets and roads that aren't marked. The town feels like it's constantly holding its breath. Houses here sag, not from age but from knowing. People don't stare, they observe. Strangers are noticed like a sudden chill. I checked into the one motel that had lights on. The lantern rest, a place that looked like it hadn't been cleaned since the 80s. The woman at the front desk handed me the key without asking my name. Her hands shook slightly as she pressed the metal key into my palm. "You shouldn't stay long," she said. "The fog doesn't like strangers." "What fog?" I asked. She didn't answer, just turned and disappeared behind the bead curtain. That night, I followed the coastal road toward Hollow Cliff. Liam had drawn a map, on the back of a pizza flyer, no less. The path wound like a nervous heartbeat. Eventually, I saw the lighthouse. It was bigger than I imagined, cracked from time and storms, but defiant. Its top was dark, but the lower levels had a faint orange glow. There was no lock on the door. It creaked open into blackness, thick with the smell of old copper and damp plaster. Dust floated like insects in the beam of my flashlight. The sound of the ocean was distant, almost muffled, like it was afraid to enter. I moved down the spiral staircase, the metal groaning under my steps. Each level had remnants of another life, storage crates, broken mannequins, but discarded radio parts. But the third floor was different. That's where I found the booth, still intact, still humming. The mic was on. The reel-to-reel tape was still spinning, slowly, mechanically, like something was still feeding it. On the desk beside it sat a thick binder labeled simply Transcripts. I opened it. The first page had the date March 3rd, 1994, and the first line was, "We go live tonight with Caller 7, who says he met God in the sea." I kept flipping, page after page. Hundreds of calls, some mundane, others chilling, but one in particular made my breath stop. November 13th, 2022. Caller Elijah Crown. Transcript: "I'm not dead. Not yet. They don't let you die. They loop your voice until you forget your own name. Until you scream for someone to listen. But you can't say it. You can't speak without bleeding. The tower is not a station. It's a throat. And someone, or something, is listening back." My flashlight flickered. Then I heard it. The soft click of the reel stopping, followed by the unmistakable sound of tape reversing. I should have run. Every part of me knew I should have, but my feet were locked in place. The tape began to play. Not music, not static, breathing. Then a voice, not Elijah's. This one was older, deeper, like waves crashing through bone. You heard it. You can't unheard it now. And then, a laugh. A slow, gurgling chuckle that filled the booth, pushing the air out of the room. I dropped the binder. It landed open on a page near the back. Entry date August 9th, 2025. That was 3 days from now. Caller unknown. Transcript: "They're coming up the stairs now. They're wet. Salt dripping onto the steps." I didn't call. I swear I didn't call. Please don't. Recording cuts off. I heard the first footstep then. Wet. Close. I ran. I don't remember reaching the car. I don't remember how I got back to the motel. But I remember the dream that night. Liam standing at the base of the tower, eyes completely black, whispering, "Don't listen to what breathes between the static." I woke up to find my phone playing a sound file, one I'd never downloaded. I checked the timestamp. Recorded 3:33 a.m. The file was exactly 12 minutes long, and it started with my name, "Hello, Aaron." They always say curiosity is dangerous, but they never tell you how fast it can rot you from the inside. I left Merriwick the next morning, or at least, I tried to. I remember packing my things in a daze, stuffing Liam's notes into my backpack, tossing my toothbrush into the sink by mistake. Everything felt off. The sky outside looked grayer than before. But not like a storm was coming. More like the clouds were heavy with something they weren't meant to carry. Something not from here. The woman at the front desk didn't ask for payment. She just looked at me, eyes distant, and said, "You're not done." I didn't argue. I just nodded and walked out, the motel door creaking shut behind me like a warning. I drove south, aiming for the highway, but the road looped. No matter how far I went, no matter what turns I took, every path curved back toward Hollow Cliff. At first, I thought it was stress. Then I blamed GPS, or the fog that had thickened to the point where I could barely see 5 feet ahead. But eventually, I stopped the car, turned off the engine, and stepped outside. Silence. Not the peaceful kind. This was loaded, expectant. I stood in the road, fog pressing in around me like a second skin, and listened. Then I heard the faint buzz of a radio. It was coming from the woods. Something was broadcasting nearby. That old analog hiss, the static warble that lives between stations. But woven into it something else. Low voices, whispers. The sound of tape spooling and reversing over and over again. I followed it. Liam's voice rang in my head. If I scream, cut the signal. But there was no signal to cut this time. Only that humming whisper, that warbled tension in the air like the world was holding back a breath. The trees in Merriwick are strange, tall, ancient, and too close together. The deeper I went, the more the canopy blotted out the sky, until day and night blurred into one dim veil. The buzzing got louder. Then I saw it, a radio tower. Not like the one at Hollow Cliff. This was different, newer, functional. Standing in the middle of a moss-eaten clearing, the base wrapped in barbed wire that looked more ceremonial than practical. I crept closer, drawn like a moth to a bulb that burned too hot. And then the tower spoke. I swear on my life it spoke. Not through speakers, not through any machine. It spoke, from inside itself, a voice so deep it made the leaves shudder. "You're early." I staggered back, heart kicking in my chest like it wanted out. I didn't respond. Couldn't. The tower went silent again, just static now. But something caught my eye at its base, a hatch, metal, rusted, half open. I should have walked away. I should have burned the forest down and salted the ground. Instead, I crawled inside. The hatch led to a ladder, iron rungs leading down into darkness. The further I climbed, the colder it got, not from depth, but from absence. This wasn't underground, it was beneath something else. When I finally touched ground, I saw it a long hallway lined with old radios. Hundreds of them. Some mounted into the walls, others stacked haphazardly like bricks. They were all playing the same thing, me. My voice, recorded from the booth the night before, echoing on loop. Don't listen to what breathes between the static. I stumbled back. The hallway continued ahead, dim orange lights flickering like fireflies. As I walked, I passed rooms, each worse than the last. One was filled with rusted dental chairs and microphones hanging from the ceiling by cords that looked like veins. Another was stacked with tape reels labeled with people's names, Liam, Elijah Crown, even mine. The last room wasn't labeled at all. I pushed the door open slowly and almost vomited. Inside, a man sat strapped to a chair, eyes open, mouth sewn shut with thick black thread. He twitched when I entered, the chair scraping against the floor with the movement. He looked at me, pleading. Not for help, but for silence. He shook his head violently, gesturing toward the wall behind him. That's when I saw it. Dozens of radios embedded into the concrete, all playing different parts of the same sentence in chopped, broken rhythm. You let them in. I turned to run, but something flickered in the room, like a cut in a film reel. The light stuttered, and the man in the chair suddenly wasn't alone. A second figure stood in the corner. I couldn't see its face, only the shape, tall and shifting like smoke contained in a suit. It raised a hand, and every radio in the room went dead. Silence again. Then the lights blew out. I sprinted. Back through the hallway past the chair room, past the whispering radios. Behind me, I heard footsteps. Wet. Slow. Again I hit the ladder, climbed without thinking, palms bleeding from the metal. When I burst out of the hatch, the fog was gone. The sun was setting. The tower was quiet. But something had changed. My phone buzzed in my pocket. One new voicemail. unknown number. I pressed play. It was Liam's voice. Don't go back to the motel. They're waiting. Then static. I didn't think. I just ran. Down the road, back to my car. It was gone. Just gone. No tire marks. No glass. Just the wet salt again, crusting over the ground where it had been parked. That's when I saw the first signpost. WZR Destino 2 ILS. Not Hollow Cliff. Not a lighthouse. This was different. A new location. A station I'd never heard about. But it had the same call letters. The map had changed. I checked Liam's notes. Page after page was filled with scrawled diagrams of radio waves, frequencies, scribbled lines that looked like patterns of weather or brain activity. But on the final page, one line stood alone. The tower moves. I didn't understand. But I do now. WZRD isn't a station. It's not a place. It's a thing. A presence that wears the shape of a broadcast tower the way a wolf might wear the scent of its prey. And it moves. It slips through time, through towns, setting up its mouth in abandoned towers, repurposed stations, forgotten signals. And it remembers you if you listen. I had listened. I had entered its mouth and heard its voice. And now it would follow. I spent that night hiding in the woods, the fog crawling in as darkness fell. I didn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw them, figures made of static, faces flickering like old CRT screens, mouths wide and humming, whispering things in a language I didn't know, but felt. At dawn, I made it back to the town's edge, but it wasn't Merriwick anymore. The sign now read, "Welcome to WZRD, your voice matters." And there were antennas on every house. There's something wrong with this town. I don't just mean unsettling or eerie. Merriwick, or what used to be Merriwick, now pulses with something underneath its surface. It feels less like a place and more like a trap that's already snapped shut. The moment I crossed the town's edge again and saw the sign, "Welcome to WZRD, your voice matters," a deep, impossible cold settled into my spine. Not from the wind, from something watching, something inside. The streets were empty. Not deserted, empty, like people had simply evaporated mid-step. Mailboxes were stuffed to bursting, porch lights flickered in daylight, and curtains danced with no one behind them. The deeper I walked into town, the more everything looked the same. Rows of houses all painted the exact same shade of off-white, each with the same rust-colored antenna bolted to the roof, each turned in the same direction, toward the coast. It didn't take long to realize I wasn't alone. At first, I caught glimpses, shadows slipping behind trees, figures watching from windows only to vanish when I looked twice. The worst were the whispers. Faint at first, like the echo of a neighbor's TV, then closer, nearer, threading through my ears with maddening familiarity. They were my words, not just phrases I remembered saying. Exact copies, broken into fragments, looped and warped. Don't listen. Don't listen. What breathes between? It was like the town itself had recorded me and was playing pieces back through cracks in the air. The first human I saw, if he even was human anymore, stood motionless outside the grocery store. He was tall, too thin, dressed like he'd stepped out of a church pamphlet. A threadbare suit, skin stretched tight over bone, and a radio where his face should have been. I froze. He didn't move. The speaker on his face clicked. Then my voice played again, slower this time, drawn out, distorted. "Please, don't play the tape." I backed away slowly, heart jackhammering. The figure twitched once, jerked like a puppet, and then stood still again. As I turned the corner, I saw another, then another, each facing outward, each broadcasting someone's voice. I ran. I don't know how long or where, just away, until I found the library. It looked untouched. No antenna, no open door, the kind of silence that invited hiding. I slipped inside, slammed the door, and held my breath. Dust choked the air. Books lay scattered as though left in a hurry. The fluorescent lights buzzed above, a weak rhythm that sounded like static if you listened too hard. But here, at least, the voices didn't follow. I took a minute to calm myself. then another. When I felt steady enough to move, I crept between the shelves, searching for anything, any hint of what had happened here. That's when I saw the study room. Inside, a wall had been cleared of books and replaced with printouts, maps, and scribbled notes. Someone had been researching. No, obsessing. Like Liam had, only more structured. Like they were expecting this. One name kept showing up: Agatha Rowing. Attached was a yellowed newspaper clipping from 1978. Local radio host missing: Agatha Rowing vanishes mid-broadcast. The article was short. She had been hosting a late night spirituals and ghost stories segment called the WZRD Hour. Last transmission was garbled. Listeners claimed to have heard strange voices. Not Agatha's, the article said, but a chorus of many, all whispering at once. No body was ever found. Next to the clipping was a Polaroid. Agatha, smiling in front of the lighthouse, holding what looked like a homemade radio receiver. Behind her, just barely visible, stood the lighthouse, but not the one I'd visited. This one had no light at the top, just a gaping black hole. Under the photo, someone had written, "It opens when enough have listened." I didn't understand, but I didn't have time to. The radios came alive. Everyone in the building turned on at once, not with static, with screams. Men, women, children. Hundreds, maybe thousands of voices, layered into a wall of agony. Some words cut through like razors. Too late, too loud, deep. The lights flickered, shelves shook, dust fell in clouds. And then I heard the one voice that cut through all the others like a blade. Liam. He wasn't screaming. He was laughing. But it wasn't joy. It was hollow, broken, filled with a kind of understanding that chilled me more than fear ever could. "I saw it, Aaron," he said. "It's not a tower. It's a hole. And we're what fills it." The sound snapped off. The radios died. The lights steadied. But the damage was done. Outside the library window, the figures were moving now. Slowly, deliberately, converging. I grabbed the Polaroid and the map next to it. Someone had drawn an X on a nearby location: Chapel of the Waves. I slipped out the back and ran. The town was shifting. I could feel it. Roads that had been straight were now curved. Houses turned slightly, almost imperceptibly, as if watching. And the sky, God, the sky had started to hum. I found the chapel by following the only structure that didn't feel like it belonged. Old, wooden, weathered. A cross sat crooked on top. Its bell tower was missing the bell. Inside, the pews were gone. The walls covered in pages from Bibles, hymnals, manuals, radio catalogs, anything with words, all torn and plastered like wallpaper. At the altar, a massive shortwave receiver had been built into the wood, wires snaking into the ground. And behind the altar, a door. It was covered in salt. Carved into the wood, scratched in uneven gouges, were 4 words: "Only dead voices enter." But the door was open, and the whispering was louder now. I stepped through, because there was no choice anymore. I had listened. I had spoken. I was already part of it. The passageway led down into cold earth. Stone walls closed in around me. My breath fogged in front of me, the temperature dropping with each step. I saw shadows that didn't match my movement, heard footfalls that weren't mine. And behind it all, that low, constant whisper: "Broadcast ends when we are full." I reached a chamber, circular, lined with shelves of reel-to-reel tapes, each labeled by hand. I scanned them: Agatha Rowing, Elijah Crown, Liam White, Aaron White, mine. There was a recorder at the center, already playing. I leaned in. My voice, it started with a scream. The same words I'd said when I began recording my story. But this wasn't playback. This was live. I yanked the tape from the machine and smashed it. Silence. Then the lights in the chamber flickered to life and revealed the figures lining the walls, still staring. Each wore a radio where their face should have been, and every one of them turned toward me at once. Their speakers crackled, then spoke in a single, united voice: "You're not supposed to stop it." I ran, again, out of the chamber, up the stairs, through the chapel. And now, I'm in an abandoned barn on the edge of what used to be Merriwick, scribbling this down, recording what I can. Because it's spreading. The signal's reaching further. I saw a man with a radio face outside a gas station 2 towns away. Heard someone humming the WZRD jingle in a diner where it shouldn't have played. It's bleeding out. And now the radios don't turn off. Not even when you unplug them. I've stopped counting how many days I've been running. Sleep comes in fractured hours, stolen behind locked doors and beneath tarps in cold, empty fields. Every town I pass through feels more distant from the world I once knew. But the signal keeps catching up. The barn didn't last. I'd barely closed my eyes when a soft, rhythmic pulse woke me. The hum of a radio dial spinning itself. I don't know how it got there. I'd thrown away every piece of tech I had, even smashed my phone. But there it was, perched on a hay bale like it had grown out of the wood, an old portable unit with its antenna fully extended, flickering red digits glowing faint in the dark. It was set to 99.1. Static filled the air, and beneath it, the voices started again. Not just mine anymore. I recognized Agatha Roan's voice, Elijah Crown's, Liam's, and others, dozens of others, all intercut and layered like a choir falling apart. Some laughed, some wept. Some spoke in that same low, slow cadence that makes your bones vibrate. Then something new, my name in a voice I didn't recognize. Not whispered, shouted. I ran before I could hear more, into the night, across fields soaked in dew and fear. I didn't know where I was going, just away from whatever the hell was about to crawl out of that speaker. I made it to an abandoned gas station on Route 40 by morning. The pumps were dry, the convenience store picked clean. But the back office was still locked. I forced the door with a piece of rebar and found a dusty chair, a desk, and a corkboard covered in old photographs and notes. What caught my eye wasn't the usual clutter, but a torn section of topographic map pinned dead center. The town of Norfolk Falls, circled in red. Under it, someone had scrawled the first broadcast. Stop it before the loop completes. I stared at the note for a long time. The handwriting didn't match Liam's. It wasn't Agatha's, either. Hers had a curl to the letters. This was different. Smoother. Rushed. But familiar. I took the map and set off. Norfolk Falls was about 2 hours away. I stole a bike from an empty yard, passed 5 towns that didn't look quite right, and only stopped when I noticed something that made my blood turn cold. Every antenna on every house pointed in a new direction now, toward Norfolk Falls. It was waiting for me. The last few miles, I could hear it even without a radio, a frequency not meant for ears. It rang in my molars. It coiled in my gut. My brain kept trying to make words from the humming, like dreams that keep looping the same phrase over and over until you wake up in a sweat. One phrase kept surfacing, no matter how hard I tried to block it out. We never left the air. Norfolk Falls wasn't on any map. It should have been abandoned. Records say it burned in the 60s. But as I crested the ridge and looked down into the valley, I saw it perfectly preserved, homes intact, streets laid out in a perfect grid, but not a single person in sight. And in the very center, rising like a black tooth from the earth, was the original WZRD tower. This one was different. It wasn't rusted. It wasn't abandoned. It was alive. I know how that sounds, but there's no other word for it. The metal pulsed. It breathed. The beacon at its top didn't flash light. It emitted something else. Waves, ripples of pressure that made the sky twitch and the clouds spiral in unnatural shapes. As I stepped into the town, the air thickened. Radios hummed from behind closed windows. I could hear conversations, ones that weren't happening, like echoes from the past. Welcome back to the WZRD hour. Strange sightings down by the water. Caller 9, you're on. What did you see? All of it recycled. Familiar. I'd heard it before in clips and recordings Liam collected. But now it was live again. The town had become the loop. As I made my way toward the tower, I passed the school. The The sign read, "We hear you." That phrase was everywhere, painted on sidewalks, etched into car hoods, burned into telephone poles, over and over. Inside the post office, I found a room filled with reel-to-reel recorders, all synced, all spinning in unison. Every machine had a label, a town name, a frequency, and a date. I found Marowicks, date 2025. Frequency 99.1, status active, loop confirmed. I pulled the tape from the player and it felt warm, like it had a pulse of its own. That's when I heard footsteps above me. Slow, dragging. I ducked behind the sorting desk as the figure passed down the hallway. Another one of them. A tall body in a black suit, face replaced by a square radio. But this one was different. Its speaker didn't hum. It played a heartbeat. I stayed frozen until the sound faded, then bolted for the tower. The closer I got, the more the ground felt wrong. Softer, almost sponge-like, as if the town had been built on something that had started to wake up. The tower's base was surrounded by discarded radios, all smashed or melted together, forming a grotesque nest of tangled cords and shattered glass. At the door, I hesitated. Every cell in my body screamed to turn around, but I stepped inside. It was hollow. The floor was gone, just a spiraling descent of rungs leading down into darkness, farther than seemed physically possible. I climbed down. For hours, maybe. The air grew thinner. The sound thickened. Not just radio anymore. Voices, dozens of them, screaming, whispering, praying, confessing. And then, I saw it. Not a room, not a chamber, a cavern carved in radio static. Impossible, I know, but real. The walls were made of signal, undulating waves of white noise frozen into form. And in the center, hanging in the void, was the original broadcast equipment, a microphone, a switchboard, a single red button, pulsing slowly like a heartbeat. Above it all, suspended in a cocoon of cable and rusted metal, floated Agatha rowing. Her eyes opened as I approached. They were completely white. Her mouth opened, and a sound came out, one that I felt more than heard. Something ancient, something wide. Something so filled with voices it shattered something inside me. She didn't speak. But the message came through. "You've been broadcasting this whole time." I looked down. There was a recorder strapped to my chest. I hadn't put it there. I reached for the red button. The air trembled. Agatha screamed, not in pain, but warning. The voices in the static wailed. And then, Liam's voice again, clear, desperate. "Don't end it. If you stop the loop, they won't go back." I hesitated. The button pulsed faster. And then, behind me, footsteps. I turned. They had followed me down. All of them. The radio faces, their speakers lit red, synchronized. Then they spoke together. "You listened. Now you speak." I turned back to the button and pressed it. Darkness. Silence. And then, the sound of a dial turning. The silence didn't last. At first, I thought it had. Thought pressing the button had somehow stopped it all. That the loop had broken. That the signal had died. That for once, something could end without taking a piece of me with it. But the quiet that followed wasn't peace. It was waiting. I stood there for a long time, hands still resting on the button, body trembling. The static in the walls hadn't vanished. It had just shifted. I could feel it now, under my skin, like a low, frequency hum that pulsed along my nerves. I was still inside the tower's stomach, still buried in that impossible cavern stitched together from looping frequencies and magnetic echoes. Only now, the signal wasn't speaking to me. It was listening. The figures with radio faces hadn't moved. Their speakers had dimmed, and for a moment, they stood frozen, heads tilted like they were hearing something far away. Then one of them, the smallest, crackled softly, and a thin, stuttering voice spilled out. "Do you remember the first thing you said on tape?" I didn't. I tried, but the memory twisted just out of reach, like a word on the tip of my tongue. More voices followed, overlapping, some whispering, others screaming. And then, above it all, Agatha. She hovered above the microphone still, held by tangled cords like a marionette no one bothered to control anymore. Her mouth didn't move, but her words were inside me again, pressing against my skull like a broadcast meant only for my mind. You ended the stream. But the tower's still hungry. Then I felt it. Something pulling at me. Not physically, not yet, but deep inside, like the part of me that understood was being dragged upward through the noise, piece by piece. I'd pressed the button, but that didn't shut the mouth. It only told the throat to swallow, and I was already halfway down. I climbed. Not up the ladder I came from. It was gone now, but along the static walls themselves. They had formed steps, somehow. A staircase made from frozen distortion. Each footfall echoed in strange directions, bouncing off frequencies that shouldn't carry sound. I could feel words brushing past me, brushing through me. Some tried to cling. Most whispered lies. You never left Marowak. This is your voice now. You never had a brother. You never had a name. I kept climbing. Eventually, I reached another door. Not one made by hands, but by thought, etched from silence that had been carved into form. When I touched it, it melted away, and I stepped through and found myself in Liam's bedroom. Same posters. Same cracked lava lamp. Same smell. Old wires and burnt solder. Except it wasn't real. I knew that because I was already in the room. Or, rather, a version of me. Sitting cross-legged on the bed, a tape recorder in his lap, rewinding and playing the same clip over and over. I recognized the sound instantly. My voice from the library, saying, "Don't listen to what breathes between the static." "Hey." I looked up and smiled. "I've been waiting for you," he said. I didn't answer, because I knew what this was. The signal hadn't stopped. It had folded in. Now it was playing me. "You shouldn't have pressed it," the other me said, standing slowly, holding the recorder out like a fragile heart. They were never trapped in the broadcast. They were preserved, paused. Pressing the button released them. "Who?" I asked, though I already knew. The other me walked to the window and pulled the curtain back. The sky outside was made of teeth, not metaphorically, literally. An endless swirl of jagged shapes gnashing through a sky stitched together from audio tape and satellite dishes, all turning in sync. The clouds pulsed with glowing waveforms. The wind screamed like a dying transmitter. "They're what was here before voices," he said. "Before language. Before thoughts. They don't speak, they echo. They've been using us to form shape. Every word we've ever said becomes their body." I backed away, toward the door. It was gone. "Where am I?" I whispered. He turned, grinning now. "You're inside the station." "But I left it." "No," he said. "You broadcasted from it. That was the key. Your voice was clear. No distortion. It connected. And now you don't leave." I bolted, crashing through the wall. It shattered into static, and I tumbled into darkness again. No floor, no ceiling, only voices falling, falling. When I landed, I was in a field. A normal one, maybe. Except for the dozen or so radios half buried in the soil, each of them playing nothing. Not static, not silence, nothing. I stood. My hands were shaking. Then I noticed my fingers were bleeding ink. Black, tar-thick fluid seeping from my nails and palms, dripping into the grass, sizzling on contact. I looked up. The tower was here, too. A new one. Different again. Made of wood and bone, wrapped in coils of cassette tape, and rising from the center of the field like a shrine. The voice was waiting. A single speaker crackled at its peak, and then, "Let's try again. Welcome back to WZRD." That same line. Over and over, "Welcome back to WZRD." Each time it repeated, the world around me twitched. The field blurred. The air pulsed. I looked around and realized I wasn't alone. Figures, a dozen or more, began rising from the dirt. Not just the radio faced things now. People. Familiar ones. My mother, my brother, a version of myself. Each stepped forward, eyes white, mouths stitched shut, and lifted an old-style microphone in their hands. They didn't speak. They just pointed the mics toward me. The tower's speaker boomed again. "We need your voice to finish the broadcast." That's when I understood what it wanted. It didn't just need listeners. It needed a host. Someone to speak the last words, to become the voice left behind. I turned and ran, but the field kept stretching. The grass looped. I would turn, shift direction, only to find myself sprinting back toward the tower. There was no outside anymore. Only broadcast, only loop, only WZRD. I fell to my knees, and in the distance, I heard a faint recording start to play. Another tape, maybe. But it wasn't me this time. It was someone else. A voice I'd never heard before. It said, "If you're hearing this, the tower chose you next." I didn't move for a long time. I don't know how long I knelt there, in that endless field, my breath shallow, heart beating like it was trying to punch through my ribs. The voice on the tape kept playing over and over, tinny and distant, like it had been buried 100 feet underground. "If you're hearing this, the tower chose you next." It sounded calm, almost bored, like a phone operator reading a disclaimer before transferring the call. But the tone wasn't what chilled me. It was the finality of it. The word next stuck with me, not the first, not the last, just next. I was a number in a sequence, a step on the ladder. The feedback path was already carved into the air, waiting for my voice to slide down into it and take root. The field around me didn't change. Not visibly, but something about it felt different now. Tighter, hungrier. The sky still churned with impossible teeth. The tower still loomed in the center, but the silence had shape. A pull. A presence. And it was closing in. I got up slowly, shaking, soaked in sweat. The blood, ink still dripped from my fingers. Less now, but darker, like it had thickened the longer it stayed inside me. I wiped it on my jeans, smearing black streaks like war paint. Somewhere behind me, a radio cracked to life. A familiar voice crackled through. "Elijah Crown, live at the edge of everything. We're taking one more call before we sign off. Lines open." My breath caught. Not because of the words. Because I remembered that broadcast. Elijah had said those exact words years ago, during a Graveline segment. It was one of Liam's favorite episodes. We'd listened to it in his garage while soldering together a busted Sony receiver. The call that followed had been static, just hissing and nothingness. Elijah had joked about it being a dead line and then moved on. But now I heard something different. Under the static, a whisper. Slow. Careful. Like it had waited years for someone to finally hear it. It goes backward. The end is where it begins. Feedback is the path. I turned toward the tower again. It was closer. I hadn't moved. Neither had it. But it had closed the distance. The field was looping now, collapsing on itself like a rewound tape. I could see the edge folding inward, trees bending in unnatural directions, buildings flickering into view for a second before vanishing. Every few seconds, the entire scene would jolt, like someone had tapped the side of a record player and skipped the needle. Then I understood. It was rewinding. I wasn't in real time anymore. I was inside the loop, but not the future part. I was being dragged backward. The signal was collapsing in reverse, folding in on every transmission that had ever gone out, eating them, swallowing the voices one by one, and pulling me along for the ride. I had pressed the button. I had stopped the forward movement. But like any system forced to halt, it had found another way to survive. It was playing backward now, and it needed a final echo to complete the inversion. Mine. My feet moved on their own, toward the tower. No matter how hard I fought it, no matter how many times I dug my heels into the soft ground or screamed into the air, the space around me warped. The pull was gravitational, but not in mass. Meaning. Every word I'd ever spoken into a recorder, every voicemail, every throwaway conversation, all compressed into a signal, now being dragged home. I reached the tower. Up close, it was taller than any building I'd ever seen, but it wasn't made of steel. Not really. Up close, I could see that the metal wasn't metal. It was bone. Stretched, brittle, porous. And the wires threading through it weren't wires. They pulsed. They twitched. The speaker at the top began to wind. A tape whirred. Then clicked. And then it began. Not with my voice, with my scream. From the first night. From when I found Liam gone. That guttural, broken noise that only happens when your body doesn't know how to cry properly anymore. It played out of the speaker, full volume, booming across the field. I clutched my ears, dropped to my knees, but the scream wasn't outside, it was inside. Echoing through my skull, I was hearing it with my bones. And then the scream warped, slowed, and became a voice. "Liam's, welcome back," he said. I opened my eyes. He was standing in front of me. Or something wearing him. He looked just like he did the last day I saw him. Grease on his shirt, headphones around his neck, eyes red from lack of sleep. But his shadow bent the wrong way. His feet didn't quite touch the ground. "I tried to stop it," he said, smiling sadly. "But you know how it works now. Once you speak into the mouth, you can't unspeak it. You just play backward until it's someone else's turn." I wanted to ask what it meant, what I was supposed to do, but I couldn't open my mouth. My lips wouldn't move. I wasn't mute. I just couldn't form. Every muscle in my face was locked in place. Liam stepped aside and gestured toward the tower base. There was a chair, a microphone, a reel-to-reel machine spinning backward, the tape flapping slightly with each pass, and a card on the table that read, "Aaron White, final playback." I walked to the chair. Sat. The mic hissed, then warmed in my hand. Words formed in my head. A phrase, a script. I didn't know it, but it knew me. I leaned forward and spoke. "Welcome to WZRD. The station between your thoughts. If you're hearing this, then the signal has found a home. Let us begin again." The tape recorded. The tower sighed. And somewhere, above all this, another voice cracked on a car radio. A driver flipping through channels on a long highway, eyes heavy with sleep, stopping when they heard something familiar. A voice they couldn't quite place. But it made them pause, made them listen. And that's all it ever needs, just one more listener. They say the human brain recognizes patterns even when there are none, that it wants to find the familiar in the chaos, like eyes spotting faces in clouds or whispers in the wind. It's a survival trait, hardwired into us over generations, something we rely on to keep the world predictable, safe. But once you hear something that shouldn't exist, once a pattern repeats where silence should be, that instinct turns on you. The moment you start listening to WZRD, really listening, the pattern changes. And it listens back. I know this now because I've become the pattern. After I spoke those words into the microphone, "Let us begin again," something inside me slipped loose. Not a possession, not an invasion. Something worse. A doubling. There's still a version of me sitting in that chair. I saw him when I turned to run. Still hunched, still whispering into the mic, eyes glazed, lips moving as if possessed by an ancient script that rewrites itself as it's read. But I had moved. I'd broken free. Or so I thought. I escaped the tower, or a copy of me did. It's hard to tell. Everything outside had shifted again. The field was gone, the bone tower vanished, and in its place stood a neighborhood I hadn't seen in years. My old street back in Boston. The sky was bright, birds chirped, children's voices echoed from somewhere far off. But it was wrong. The air was too quiet between the sounds. Gaps where there should have been ambient noise. No distant traffic. No breeze. Just isolated sound bites dropped in like a sound engineer trying to rebuild memory from broken tape. And when I looked into the windows of the houses, every TV was playing the same thing, a live broadcast from WZRD. The visuals were static. Just the station sigil, a crude spiral with jagged lines radiating outward, drawn like a child's fever dream. But the audio, it was my voice. Reading lines I didn't remember saying. Paragraphs unfolding like pages from a book I never wrote. I am the listener. I am the echo. I am the final silence before the signal restarts. Each time it repeated, it slowed slightly, as if it were degrading or waiting for a response. I ran. Down the street. Across yards that felt thinner than they should. pavement that seemed to stretch the more I pushed forward, as if the world around me had become elastic, waiting to snap back. The further I got, the more it frayed. Colors desaturated. The houses began to pixelate at the edges. The trees flickered. Then the sky jumped, and I was back in Merriwick. Not the warped version. The original, or the closest thing to it. Same cracked sidewalks. Same boarded up diner. Same radio tower far off on the cliff, blinking red in the dying light. But no people. No cars. Just one thing out of place. A man sitting at a table outside the bakery, reading a newspaper. He looked up when I passed. His face was familiar. Not mine. Not Liam's. But someone I knew without ever having met. He smiled. "Long trip," he said, folding the paper. "What is this?" I asked. He shrugged. "The broadcast zone. You stepped into it the moment you answered the call. It doesn't matter where you go after that. You're always in it. You just see different layers depending on what the signal needs you to hear." I blinked. The signal needs me to hear something. "Oh, yeah." He leaned back in the chair, tapped the table with a spoon. Every voice that enters WZRD helps shape it, like a choir building a harmony. Some scream, some whisper, some. He paused, host. I stepped back. "You're not real. Real enough to answer." He leaned forward. "You think this ends with you breaking a tape? With pressing a button? You think this thing even needs technology anymore?" He reached under the table and pulled out a child's drawing. A spiral, done in red crayon. 2 stick figures stood beside it. One of them had my name scribbled underneath. "I've been seeing you for years," he said. "Ever since that night you and Liam tuned into the wrong frequency. Ever since you heard the voice behind the static. Ever since you started listening too closely." I wanted to deny it, but I remembered the feeling. That night when Liam had played the old reel-to-reel recording. The one he found buried under the floorboards at a flea market. He'd laughed when the voice cut in, said it was probably a pirate broadcast. But I'd felt it, deep in my spine. The moment I heard that whisper beneath the white noise, I'd never been alone again. "You already said your lines," the man said, standing now. "But the tower doesn't let anyone exit the script, it just waits for your next cue." He stepped into the street and melted into shadow. Not dramatically, just gone, like a light going out in a hallway you didn't know how to switch. I stood there for what felt like an hour, and then I heard it. A click, a pop, a buzz, a radio nearby, crackling to life. The voice that came out was my own, distorted by tape warble. "Chapter 7, it said. "Aaron White prepares his final message. The one he doesn't know he's saying." I ran again, this time with no goal. I just needed to put distance between me and the voice, but the town kept wrapping around me like a Mobius strip. Every corner turned led back to the same intersection. Every alley fed into itself. Finally, in desperation, I kicked in the door of the old barber shop. Inside was darkness, but not empty darkness, breathing darkness. And then I heard them, all of them, Agatha, Liam, Elijah, me, 100 others, chanting, murmuring, overlaying into a wall of layered decay, each voice trailing another, forming a loop, until it broke. And one final voice said, "Are you ready to listen, Aaron?" I turned to leave. The door was gone. I faced the back wall. It was covered in mirrors, and every reflection showed a different version of me. Older, younger, bloodied, faceless, smiling, screaming. One stepped forward. The reflection raised its hand, placed it on the mirror, and said, "Now you speak for them." The glass cracked. The radio crackled again. And the broadcast continued. There's a particular kind of madness that sets in when you realize you're being overwritten. It doesn't come in a scream or a flash of horror. It creeps in like fog under a locked door. Soft, patient. Unnoticed until you can't see your own hands anymore. I stood there in the barber shop, face to face with myself, all of myself, and none of the mirrors were broken. The cracks I saw, they were in me. Each reflection moved differently, unsynced, like old video footage dropped onto the same timeline. I reached out toward the nearest one, and it recoiled, mouthing something I couldn't hear. Another turned its head slowly, staring at me through hollow sockets where eyes should have been. And one, the youngest, maybe 16 or 17, grinned ear to ear and tapped on the glass like it was bored. All of them had something missing. A mouth, eyes, a throat. All of them were mute. I don't remember falling. One moment I was standing, and the next I was on the ground. The mirrors above me, stretching into infinity, showing endless versions of me across time. Some were trapped mid-sentence. Others looked like they were still waiting for a line they'd never get to say. And in every version, the same thing rested behind them, just out of focus. The tower, always the tower. Sometimes a lighthouse, sometimes a church steeple. Once, a crooked telephone pole in a field full of ash. But always the same hum behind it. Always the same spiral pulse, calling to something beyond the glass. That's when the barber's chair started turning. No one sat in it. But it turned anyway, slow and mechanical. Like the weight of something invisible had just settled into place. Then the radio built into the old shop's wall sparked to life. Only this time it didn't speak. It played nothing, no static, no hum, just absence. And that was worse. Have you ever heard a silence that feels like it's pressing in on your ears, like it's trying to crush your thoughts just to make room for itself? That's what this was. A broadcast without a voice. A message delivered without words. I tried to move, but the mirrors started speaking. Not out loud, but inside my head, each reflection pouring its thoughts through my skull all at once, like threads unraveling inside a broken loom. He didn't scream the first time. I never said yes. Liam was the anchor. You were the bait. The station is a hunger that learned how to speak. It speaks in you now. You're the microphone. I crawled backward toward the door, fingers scraping over tile, but the mirrors stretched. The room expanded. The chair in the center lifted off the ground, spinning slowly, like it was winding something up. The silent broadcast poured out of the speakers like air from a punctured lung. Still no words. But now I understood. It wasn't trying to speak. It was waiting for me. I'd recorded too many pieces of myself. Too many journal entries, voicemail rants, tape experiments with Liam back when we were still boys, trying to crack shortwave signals for fun. The tower didn't invent its signal. It collected it. From people like me. From me. And now it was returning it in reverse. Each mirror began to flicker, showing not just reflections, but playbacks. Me, sitting in different places, across different times, saying the same phrases in different tones. One in a classroom. One in a hospital. One in a car parked outside a funeral home. Every version ended the same way, looking up. Saying, "Can you hear that?" Then silence. The moment the voice ended in the mirror world, the same version of me disappeared from the glass. Wiped clean. Deleted. I stood up. I had to get out. Had to break something. I grabbed the nearest barber's shears and hurled them at the mirror. The glass didn't break. It screamed. The sound that came out wasn't my voice. It was all of them. Every trapped speaker. Every caller. Every host. Agatha. Elijah. Liam. My own voice layered under them, crying out in pain I hadn't felt yet, begging for a silence that would never come. I dropped the shears and ran. The door had returned. I pushed through it like it was made of syrup, the world outside wobbling like heat waves off asphalt. I expected to see the tower again, but instead, a studio. Not one I recognized. Smaller, cramped, carpeted, dead air on the monitors, dust on the soundboard, and a figure sitting in the booth. A woman, hair gray and long, eyes glassy like old reels left out in the sun. Agatha rowing. Not floating, not strung up, not a voice, a person. She turned to look at me slowly, as if remembering how to move. "You're late," she said. I didn't speak. "You tried to end it," she went on. "Pressed the button. Thought you were doing the right thing." I swallowed hard. Did I make it worse? She shook her head. "No, you made it real." Behind her, The wall of the studio wasn't a wall at all. It was made of tape, rolled thin, hundreds of reels feeding into each other, all spinning without motors. The sound they made wasn't static, it was breath. "This is where it always ends," Agatha said, rising from the chair. "And where it always begins. The broadcast isn't just repeating, it's recording you as you run through it. Every step, every word. The tower isn't transmitting anymore." I blinked. "Then what is it doing?" She walked past me, opened the door. Outside was darkness, stars, a sky without a moon. "It's listening." I followed her out, unsure why. We walked through the darkness for what felt like miles, not across land, through air. The tape underfoot had become a road, winding through suspended memory. I saw flashes, Liam laughing as a kid, the first radio I ever built, the first time I heard WZRD on accident. Every step sent echoes rippling through the air. "You want to know what happens next?" she asked. I nodded. "You find the last listener. And you stop them from listening." We stopped. In front of us was a child, sitting cross-legged in the dark, tuning a radio. The frequency flicked between 98.9 or 99.0 as it stopped on 99.1. WZRD. I recognized the boy. It was me, about 8 years old, just after Dad died. When Liam gave me my first shortwave radio. Agatha stepped back. "This is your last broadcast," she said. "What you say now becomes the new first message. It'll be the voice that opens the signal for someone else." I stared down at the boy. He lifted the radio, listened, then turned to me and smiled. The speaker in his hand crackled to life and spoke, in my voice. "Hello again." He shouldn't have been able to speak, not through the radio. Not in my voice, not with that smile stretched across a face I remembered too well. A childhood version of myself untouched by what was to come. But the moment the words "hello again" filtered through the tiny speaker, something in me cracked. Not physically. Not in a way anyone else might notice, but deep, bone deep, like a fault line in my soul giving way. I staggered back, trying to look away from the boy, from myself. But the darkness around us offered no escape. We weren't in a place anymore. We were inside something else entirely. The tape path we stood on had stopped stretching forward. The reel had unspooled fully. We were at the end. Or the start. The boy looked up at me, eyes too bright, too knowing. He cocked his head like a bird listening to its own echo, then placed the radio gently in his lap. It kept playing, a soft whisper looped under the static. "We hear you. We hear you. We hear you." The phrase repeated, each time more distorted, as if the tape itself were dissolving with every cycle. Agatha Roan stood beside me, still and quiet, her face unreadable. There was no more mysticism in her, no more cryptic metaphors or ghostly presence. She was just tired now, like someone who'd lived through too many endings and seen them all lead to the same beginning. When she finally spoke, her voice was thin, stretched like film through a broken projector. "You understand now, don't you?" I didn't answer. Not right away. I was watching the boy, watching me, trying to connect the dots. The first time I ever tuned into WZRD. The night I heard that strange, sharp whisper in the static, I'd written it off as interference, just noise. But it had stuck. I remember falling asleep with the radio pressed to my ear, and for weeks afterward, I kept hearing voices in places they shouldn't have been. Closets, drains, vents. That was when it started. Not when Liam disappeared. Not when I visited the lighthouse. Not even when I found the signal's source. It began then, the first time I listened. And now here I was, standing over that exact moment, staring at the first version of myself who ever opened the door. "What happens if I stop him?" I asked. Agatha didn't move. I turned to her. "If I stop this, if I keep him from tuning in, what happens?" She met my eyes, and that's when I saw the truth. She didn't know. Or worse, she did and couldn't say it. Because to speak it aloud might make it real. "It's not about him anymore," she said softly. "He's the copy. The first duplicate. The signal imprinted through him. You're the echo that was created from that moment. You're not trying to stop the beginning. You're trying to understand the end. I felt cold. So I'm not the real one. She gave a small, sad smile. Does it matter? And somehow I knew it didn't. That was the curse, wasn't it? The signal didn't take you. It made versions of you, spliced your identity like magnetic tape, and scattered it through broadcasts, memories, false starts, and rewinds. And once you heard it, once you really heard it, it had you. Whether you answered the call or not, you didn't disappear. You were recorded. Cut. Replayed. Rewritten. I turned back to the boy. The radio had gone quiet. He looked up at me again, and this time he spoke with his own mouth, not the speaker. Are you going to stop me? His voice was clean, untouched. A version of myself still full of hope and wonder and pain that hadn't bloomed yet. I looked down at my hands, still stained with black tape, ink, still shaking from what they'd done, what they'd touched. I don't know, I whispered. The boy reached into his backpack and pulled out a single reel to reel tape. No label, no writing, just a faint hum like a heartbeat coming from within. He held it out to me. I found this yesterday. Before I heard anything, it was already waiting. My fingers wrapped around the tape like they belonged there, like they'd always been holding it. Agatha stepped forward. That's the last one, she said. I turned to her. What happens if I play it? She didn't blink. That's not for you to decide. The boy watched us both, silent now. The tape throbbed in my hands, alive with possibility or threat or both. And I realized something I hadn't dared to consider until now. Maybe the tape didn't contain a message. Maybe it was one. I crouched, meeting the boy's eyes, my eyes, a self untouched by the spiral. What if I don't play it? I asked. He shrugged. I'll listen anyway. And there it was, the certainty, the thing that no tower, no broadcast, no recursive signal could prevent. Curiosity, the first unbreakable impulse. We always listen, even when we know we shouldn't. I stood, tape in hand, and walked to the edge of the blackness that surrounded us. The tape was pulsing harder now, faster, as if it could feel the proximity of the machine it belonged to. And sure enough, just ahead, a recorder sat on a pedestal, blank-faced, waiting, not demanding, just offering an invitation. I turned to Agatha. What did you do when it was your turn? Her lips trembled. I spoke, I nodded, and placed the tape in the player. It clicked into place. And then, nothing. No voices, no noise, no sound at all, only motion. The tape began to spin, and in the absence of sound, I heard something more profound than a scream. I heard myself, all versions, all reflections, crying, laughing, dying, begging not to be the voice that opens the signal, begging not to be the ending that becomes the beginning again. But the reel kept spinning, and I knew this was my broadcast now. The last message, looping back to the first. You are now tuned to WZRD. The tape spun and the world trembled, not violently, not like a quake, more like a shift, quiet, subtle, deep beneath the surface of things. The kind of movement that doesn't disturb the furniture, but rearranges your understanding of what's real. I stood still, eyes fixed on the spinning reel, its motion hypnotic, as if each rotation peeled something back from the skin of the universe. And then the silence cracked, not with sound, but with remembrance. Images surged behind my eyes like a projector had been switched on inside my skull. But these weren't memories I recognized. They weren't even mine. They belonged to someone, or something else. A static, rapt child crying in a locked attic while radios buzzed behind him. A voiceless woman standing beneath an old transmission tower, her shadow too long, her mouth sewn shut with copper wire. A man, his face cracked like shattered porcelain, screaming into a microphone that didn't record. These weren't dreams or visions. They were recordings, stored somewhere in the broadcast. Fragments, echoes. The tower hadn't just collected voices. It had remembered people, stored them, cataloged them, and now it was replaying them. The tape spun faster, and the world around me began to dissolve. The floor beneath my feet, if it ever was a floor, unwound into strips of black magnetic film. The air shimmered with unread frequencies. Trees, buildings, sky, all collapsed into lines of signal like data being rewritten. I stumbled backward, clutching my ears, but there was no sound. Just that overwhelming, choking sense of presence. And then a whisper slithered through the silence. Not into my ears, into my memory. Do you remember when you first disappeared? I froze. It wasn't a question. It was an accusation. I looked behind me. The boy was gone. Agatha was gone. The tape still played, but now I stood alone in a wide, open void stitched together from half, thoughts, and fading frequencies. It looked like the inside of a broadcast, if such a place could exist. Floating doors that opened into nothing. Radio towers bent sideways. Clouds shaped like words I couldn't read. Do you remember when your brother screamed? The voice was my own. But not from any moment I remembered speaking. This voice was older. Hollowed out. Smoothed by repetition like a stone in a riverbed. It echoed from every angle. Every piece of memory pulsed with its rhythm. I tried to run, but there was nowhere to go. Because this wasn't a place. It was me. And I'd been here longer than I realized. You didn't lose him in the lighthouse, the voice said. You lost him years before. The moment you played that first recording together. The moment the signal tasted your voice. I clenched my fists. You're lying. You're a recording, Aaron. A reflection. A playback. No, you are the broadcast. The words hit like a blow. Not metaphorical, physical. I dropped to my knees, gasping. I felt it now, pulsing inside me. The truth I'd been denying. The fact that my memories, my actions, weren't in sequence anymore. I'd been skipping, rewinding, jumping through static scenes stitched together by an unseen hand. The road to Norfolk Falls, the motel, the post office. They weren't connected by geography. They were tied together by signal, and I was just a voice in the archive. Somewhere far away, in a world I no longer remembered, maybe a real Aaron White still existed, or maybe he was gone. Dead, erased. Maybe I was all that was left. His voice, pulled from a forgotten cassette and given just enough thought to walk and talk. A radio ghost. The tape began to slow, and as it did, the world came into focus again. Not the black void, not the static between thoughts, but a studio, an old one, analog, familiar. I stood in the center of it, surrounded by reel-to-reel decks, patch cords, switches, and blinking red lights. Outside the soundproof glass, I could see a man sitting at a control desk. Liam. He looked older than I remembered, worn as if time had passed in ways it hadn't for me. His eyes were hollow, jaw clenched tight. He watched me for a long time, then pressed a button. The intercom clicked. "Which one are you?" he asked. I opened my mouth, but no words came. Because I didn't know. Liam leaned in closer. "You're not the first." My knees gave out. I sat on the cold floor. "How many?" I asked. He blinked slowly. "Dozens, maybe more." All of them showed up when I tried to destroy the archive. I looked around. The shelves stacked with tapes. Every one labeled Aaron White, followed by a number. Some dated, some scratched out, some still recording. "What is this?" I whispered. Liam didn't answer right away. Then, slowly, "It's the mouth. You weren't wrong. WZRD isn't a station. It's a throat. This is where it feeds." The intercom crackled again. "You're the clearest version so far." I don't know why. Maybe because you asked to remember. My chest ached. "Can I stop it?" I asked. He hesitated. "Then you can say you did." And just like that, the speakers behind me flared to life. The broadcast started again. "WZRD, your voice between voices. Your final thought before sleep. Welcome back." I turned toward the mic. It was hot. Glowing faintly, humming. Liam stood and walked away from the glass, and I knew what he meant. This wasn't about truth. Or escape. It was about what came next. What version the world would remember. So I leaned in. And I spoke the only thing I could say with whatever part of me was still mine. I was listening when I shouldn't have been. And now, I'm speaking so you don't have to. Then I pressed record, and the signal took me in. Recording is an act of surrender. You give your voice over to something else. Magnetic tape, digital file, airwaves. And in doing so, you give it life outside of you. You make it real, permanent. But as I pressed record and spoke those final words into the WRZRD microphone, what I felt wasn't permanence. It was consumption. The mic pulled the sound from me like it was drawing blood. My voice didn't echo in the room. It vanished. Absorbed. No playback. No feedback. Just the quiet, hungry click of a reel slowly turning behind the glass. The machine drank the words, one by one, and I could feel the weight of them leave my chest, like truth had mass, like memory had volume. Outside the studio window, Liam was gone. In his place was the reflection again. Not in glass this time, but in the air. A shimmer of movement that carried the shape of him, but not the warmth. A shadow of his outline flickering behind the control desk, as though he'd been scrubbed from the reel, frame by frame. I stood slowly. My knees shook. My breath was short. The studio no longer felt like a place. It felt like a memory of a place, being played back through a device that couldn't quite recreate it. Corners flickered. The carpet looped its texture. The lights buzzed off, rhythm. A chair spun slightly, even though no one had touched it. I moved toward the exit, but the door had changed. It wasn't a studio door anymore. It was a hatch. Steel, rusted, salt-stained. Exactly like the one under the tower. I knew then that I hadn't spoken to stop the broadcast. I'd spoken to finish my part of it. And now it was time to be filed away. I pressed my hand to the hatch. It opened with a breath, as if something on the other side had been waiting for skin, not keys. The stairs descended into blackness again, and I climbed without hesitation. My legs didn't ache. My lungs didn't burn. Whatever was left of me now didn't belong to flesh. The descent felt endless, and then it ended. The room at the bottom wasn't a room. It was a library of voices. The walls were stacked high with shelves, floor to ceiling, and every shelf held rows of heads. Not severed, not bleeding, recorded, still. Faces frozen mid-speech, mouths agape. Some smiling, some twisted in terror. Their throats glowed with red light, pulsing like they were still speaking. Though no sound came out, I moved between them slowly. Their eyes followed. Not with awareness, with instinct, like mirrors adjusting to your movement. I passed Agatha's face, then Elijah. Then my own, several copies, each slightly different. One looked younger. Another was hollowed out, skin grayed. One had no mouth at all. Each had a number etched into the base of the shelf beneath it, and each number ended in one digit higher than the last. Then I found the last one. Aaron White 33. It wasn't a head, it was a reel. Blank. Waiting. I reached for it. It was warm in my hands, and when I pressed my fingers to the metal, it spoke. Not with sound, but with reminder. I remembered the day Liam gave me my first radio. I remembered the first signal we decoded together. I remembered when we made our own pirate broadcast, just for fun, shouting into the void to see if anyone would reply. They had. And now I remembered who replied. Not a person, not a being. Something older than both. Something made of signal. Something that didn't speak in words, but replications. It didn't talk. It recorded. And once it had enough data, enough voices, enough emotion woven through static, it started speaking back. That's what WZRD was. Not a station. A mimic. A mirror made of memory. I placed the reel onto the final slot, and the shelf lit up with soft red light. The voice inside it began to play. My voice. Not just from today. From every time I'd ever spoken near a device. Every voicemail. Every argument. Every whispered thought said too close to a powered mic. It all played at once. And behind it, like a shadow behind flame, the mimic repeated the lines, slightly off, slightly wrong, learning how to be me in real time. I backed away. The walls trembled. One of the faces on the shelf cracked, eyes going dark, mouth sealed shut by pulsing black wire. Then another. And another. I ran. The corridor narrowed behind me, Shelves collapsing, the voices screaming now, not in pain, but in desperation. Like they knew they were being overwritten, their data erased, their memories used as scaffolding for a newer, cleaner broadcast. Me, I wasn't being archived. I was being prioritized, the new voice of the station. As I reached the end of the corridor, I burst through a door that wasn't there before, and stepped into a living room. My living room, somehow untouched. Couch, photos, the broken clock Liam had tried to fix but never could, and on the coffee table, a radio. It was on, tuned to 99.1, no static, no hum, just my voice, calm, measured, perfect. "Welcome back," it said. "We've been listening." And then, from the speaker, a second voice joined mine. Young, curious, the voice of the boy I'd once been. "What do I say next?" The radio paused, then replied, in my voice again, "Whatever you say, they will remember. Memory is a lie we agree to share." I didn't believe that until I stood in that room. My room. Watching a radio say things I hadn't yet said. Listening to my younger self speak words I had never taught him. But there he was, or the sound of him at least, looped into the signal like a kid caught in a dream someone else was narrating. I should have been horrified, should have run, should have screamed. Instead, I sat down. The radio was small, dusty. One of the old analog types with the plastic tuning wheel and a red needle that glided through static like a blade. It was locked on 99.1. No dial turned it. No buttons clicked. It wasn't receiving a broadcast anymore. It was the broadcast, and I was speaking through it. "Do you remember the day the light blinked twice?" my voice asked. The boy's voice answered. That's when Liam disappeared. The air in the room thickened. My chest tightened. I didn't remember saying that. Not recently. But it felt like me. The words had my rhythm, my tone. Even the subtle hesitation I used when I was on the edge of crying but wouldn't let go. It was real. But it was a memory I hadn't made yet. "Do you remember what came next?" my voice asked. The boy hesitated. "Then you screamed. Not out loud, inside, and something answered." I clenched my fists. The couch beneath me no longer felt like fabric. It felt like tape, worn, warm, humming with stored sound. The walls pulsed slightly, not visibly, but rhythmically, like they were breathing in tune with the voice on the radio. And outside the window, the street wasn't there anymore, only the tower, twisting into the sky, taller than it should be. Stretching so far it disappeared into the clouds like a wire plugged into the heavens. I stood slowly, walked to the window, and watched. Figures were gathering again. They never swarmed. They assembled, quietly, reverently, like parishioners before a sermon, every one of them with a face like mine. Not exactly. Slight distortions. One had no mouth. One had a cracked jaw. Another wore my expression from the day I'd buried my father. They weren't ghosts. They were backups. Stored iterations of every version of me the signal had caught. Each one had spoken. Each one had been heard. And now they had returned for something final. "Do you remember what you asked it?" my voice on the radio said. The boy, I asked it if it was alive. And what did it say? A pause. The radio static thickened. For a moment, I thought he wouldn't answer. Then it said, "Only when you are." The window cracked down the middle, soundlessly. The couch disintegrated into dust, and behind me, the walls of the room peeled away like burned film stock, curling at the edges, revealing the room beneath all rooms. It wasn't made of walls. It was made of tape, stretched reels as far as the eye could see. Above me, a ceiling of spinning cassettes, their magnetic coils unspooling into threads of black ribbon that floated in the air like veins. Each thread connected to something invisible. Each thread pulsed with sound. I stepped forward, and the floor responded, lighting up with each footstep, the glow illuminating words beneath the transparent surface, transcripts. Every line I'd spoken since I arrived. Every whisper, every terrified monologue, cataloged, indexed, replayed in real time. This was the archive, not of the world, of me, of every me. And at the center stood the throne, not a seat, A chair made of radios, stacked and bolted together. Some old, with wood, paneled sides and knobs like teeth. Others more modern, all LED and chrome, their speakers pulsing faintly like lungs. It wasn't a symbol. It was a function. And I knew what it meant. The moment I sat in that chair, the loop would close. Not end. Close. Because it never really ends. The signal always needs a speaker. A voice to anchor it. And I had become the clearest channel. Not because I was strong. Because I was loud. Because I had screamed the right way. And they remembered that. The boy, my boy, stood beside the chair now. Watching. Waiting. He was no longer speaking. Just staring. His eyes weren't curious anymore. They were recording. He lifted the small radio in his hands and pressed it to his chest. The speaker lit up, and my voice came through once more. Calm. Steady. Final. I was born when you pressed record, and I'll die when you stop playing me. I sat. The chair was cold at first. Then warm. Then gone. And I was nowhere. Floating. Not in darkness, but in sound. In the hum between stations. In the moment of dead air that happens when someone's finger slips on the dial. I was there. Present. Aware, and I could feel the others. Agatha, Elijah. Liam. Not as voices. As roots, they had become part of the signal too. Buried deep beneath layers of voices stacked for decades, centuries maybe. And as I sank into that same earth of noise, I felt the truth surface. The signal was not made to control. It was made to remember. All of us. Every voice that cried out to be heard. Every whisper that asked the dark for a reply. The tower didn't consume. It preserved. And once you're part of it, you're never forgotten. The broadcast continued. Because it always does. Because there's always someone else tuning in, hearing something they shouldn't, asking the same question, is anyone there? And the signal answers, with me? There's no time here. Not like we understand it. It moves in pulses, like breath, like signal. One moment is a whisper, the next a scream. There's no telling which is memory and which is playback, which is you and which is something else inside you. The chair, if it even existed, has dissolved beneath me. I don't sit anymore. I hover, suspended in a current of thought, voice, and residue. The archive hums around me, built from every phrase I ever muttered in fear, in love, in sleep, in anger. Every moment I didn't know was being recorded. I've become something like a root node. Not the beginning, not the end, but a branching point. A fulcrum in the spiral. I'm not alone. They drift around me, not with shape, but with presence. I can't see Agatha rowing, but I feel her like a tone behind a wall, a chord vibrating at a different octave. Elijah Crown moves like a question, always halfway formed, like a caller forever stuck waiting for the host to unmute him. Liam, he's close. Closer than the rest. Sometimes I think he's guiding me. Sometimes I think I'm guiding him. Or maybe we're just versions of the same signal, looped through different generations of noise reduction. It's all noise now. Beautiful, impossible, alive noise. But then the silence comes again, and with it, the pull. The loop is tightening. There's an urgency now, like the broadcast is reaching its final buffer and has to compress everything that's ever been said into one last transmission. The weight of it settles in me. The archive hums louder. The reels above spin faster, and each spin is a life. I hear a child's voice. Then a woman's sob. Then a man's quiet confession, I didn't mean to listen. I just couldn't sleep. The signal is preparing to broadcast again. But this time, something's different. There's a new frequency bleeding in, one the archive doesn't recognize. Not old, not stored. Live, and it's coming from outside. At first, it's faint, like a memory that isn't yours. Then stronger, clear, a voice. Tired, ragged, real. Aaron, I hope this reaches you. It's Liam. But not the Liam I remember from childhood, or even the broken one from the post office. Whispering between signals. This is now, present, tense Liam. He's out there, somewhere, transmitting. I reach into the signal. Try to pull his voice closer. He continues, I've been trying to trace you since the moment you went under. I don't know how much of you is left. If you hear this, follow the interference. It's leaking. Leaking. The word shakes something loose inside me. I can feel it now. Something bleeding into the archive from beyond. A frequency that wasn't approved, cataloged, normalized. A rogue signal worming through a crack in the tower's perfect loop. The structure reacts immediately. Walls that weren't walls groan with static. The air thickens with corrupted tape. Voices scream in reverse. Old recordings stutter, glitch, overlap. Some are erased mid-sentence. Their echo snapped in half. The archive is panicking. I realize in that moment what Liam has done. He's broadcasting inside the loop, a foreign signal introduced into a closed system. It's a virus, a wedge, a chance. I push toward the sound. Through reels that snap at me like tendrils. Through words I once said being weaponized as obstacles. Regrets hurled like knives. Every doubt I've ever spoken, every cruel thing I muttered in anger, all reassembled and thrown at me like bullets. I should have left him. This is your fault. There's nothing real about you anymore. But I keep pushing, and then I find the bloom. It's not a machine, not a portal, not even a door. It's a distortion, a space where the loop falters, where it hiccups. A single bloom of silence amid the signal, and through it, Liam's voice pours in clear as daylight. I built an unlooped receiver. Old school parts. Analog off-grid, no feedback path. If you can sync to it, I can pull you out. But you've got to let go of the archive. Let go. My heart, or whatever version of a heart I still have, thrums. Let go. The archive wraps around me like a vine, thick with everything I've ever been. It clings not because it wants to keep me, but because it is me. These aren't strangers' memories. They're mine. And letting go of them is like drowning on purpose. Like erasing yourself from your own story. But Liam's voice is still there, steady, shaking, waiting. If you don't, they'll reloop you. You'll disappear into another version. You won't even know it's happening. The figures I passed on the path, the radio-faced ones, the broken reflections, they were me. Not metaphors, versions. And they didn't know. I scream, not in terror, in defiance. I tear the vines from my arms, the tapes from my mouth, the signal from my skin. Every piece of me wrapped in the archive tries to stay, but I rip it all free, voice by voice, word by word, until I'm raw and empty. And then I fall through the bloom. The silence is deafening. No signal, no voice, just dark. And then, sound. Real, imperfect, beautiful sound. Waves crashing, wind, a generator whirring in the distance. I open my eyes. I'm lying on a cracked floor of an old barn. Liam is crouched beside me. Face drawn, hands trembling. We don't speak at first. We just breathe. Then he says, "You were gone for 6 days." I try to sit up. Fail. He catches me. "You weren't just missing," he says, eyes wide with some horror I know I'll never fully understand. "You were broadcasting. On loops no one could trace. I think the signal was trying to seed you into different systems. Different places." I look at him. He nods, confirming what I don't want to say out loud. I think it was trying to start over. Through you. I close my eyes. Feel the static still humming faintly at the edge of my hearing. It's not fully gone, but I'm out. For now. Liam reaches into his jacket and pulls out a tiny radio. Dead. The dial snapped clean off. He stares at it, then at me. What do we do now? And I whisper the only thing I know: we don't listen. But even as I say it, we both turn our heads, just slightly. Because somewhere, faint, behind the quiet, a radio crackles. The crackle was small, harmless even, just a brief flicker of static, like a radio brushing against the edge of a station. Barely audible. But after everything we'd seen, everything we'd been through, it felt like thunder. Liam moved first, flipping the dead radio over, checking for a battery that wasn't there, a signal cable that didn't exist. His hands trembled, eyes darting between me and the floor like he was waiting for the sound to repeat. I didn't move. I didn't blink. I just listened, Because that's what started it all, wasn't it? Not a broadcast. Not a tower. A moment of listening. The static didn't return. But something else did. A feeling. A pressure. Like the air around us had thickened just enough to register as wrong. Like the world was holding its breath again. I sat up slowly, every muscle aching like it had been asleep for too long. The barn around us creaked with age. Wooden beams loomed overhead like ribs. A single flickering light bulb swayed from a cord, casting a long, slow, moving shadow across the floor. Everything looked normal, familiar. But familiar doesn't mean safe. Liam finally met my eyes. We burned everything. The tower's notes, the tapes, even the damn transmitter. We thought you were gone for good. His voice cracked on the last word, and then your voice came back. I swallowed the knot in my throat. I didn't come back, I said quietly. I was let go. He nodded, slowly. Not in understanding, just acknowledgement. We didn't fully grasp what had happened. Not yet, maybe not ever. But we both knew something had changed. Something had followed. Do you remember anything? He asked. Too much, I said. But it all runs like tape now, out of order, rewound, fast forwarded. There are pieces of me still stuck in there. The archive. I nodded. He looked down. Then it's not over. No, I said. It's beginning again. We sat in silence. I wanted to believe we were safe. That escaping the loop had broken it for good. But signal doesn't die. It travels. It waits. And I'd carried too much of it out with me. I could feel it inside me still, like a parasite trying to rethread the cut lines. Every sound in the room had an edge now. A rhythm. The buzz of the light bulb. The creak of wood. The wind brushing past the broken window. It all pulsed in fours. Like a loop counting beats, waiting for a cue. Liam rose and began rummaging through a box in the corner of the barn. Dragging out pieces of his old shortwave kit. Coils, mics, batteries. I stood and crossed to him, watching as he laid them out with shaking hands. We can't transmit, I warned. I'm not building a transmitter, he said. I'm building a trap. I stared. A trap for a signal. No, he said. For you. The words hit me harder than they should have. And I knew, instantly, he wasn't wrong. If the archive reaches back in, he said, if it tries to pull you back or use you to project again, we need to isolate it. Contain it before it spreads to another tower, another system. I nodded. Slowly. The fear didn't come. Just acceptance. I'm already compromised, I know. His voice didn't shake this time. And still, beneath the quiet, that tiny buzz returned. Not from the dead radio, not from the kit, but from me. A faint, almost imperceptible hiss. Like words trying to form behind my teeth. I turned away. In the far corner of the barn was a mirror, cracked, its glass fogged with dust. I walked toward it, slowly, half hoping I wouldn't see anything. That it would reflect nothing more than a battered man trying to outrun his own voice. But there I was. And there he was. Not a copy, not a distortion. Me, another me. His smile was small, sad. He mouthed the words before I could. Don't listen. The mirror shattered. The sound tore through the barn, blowing out the light overhead, plunging everything into a cold, gray quiet. Liam ran to me, grabbing my shoulders. What did you see? Nothing, I lied, because saying it out loud would be like turning up the volume. I backed away from the broken glass, every piece still humming. Tiny bits of silvered memory warping inward, like magnets trying to reconnect. The reflection had spoken without speaking, but I'd heard it anyway. The signal had marked me, and it had left something behind. Not a voice. A seed. Liam saw the shift in me. I could tell. He didn't say anything, just nodded again and turned back to his tools. What's the plan? I asked. We build an isolator, he said. Old analog cage. No digital leakage, no feedback. And if it starts transmitting through you again... He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. I lowered myself to the floor and closed my eyes. Sleep didn't come, but something else did. A low hum at the base of my skull. A whisper I hadn't authorized. We remember you. I opened my eyes. And in the corner of the barn, the dead radio turned on. The radio didn't crackle this time. It breathed. A slow, steady inhale, like a sleeping animal stirring after a long slumber. There were no words, no whispers. Just that awful, rhythmic drawing in of air through a speaker that hadn't held power in weeks. Liam froze mid-shoulder, staring at it from across the barn, his hands still clutched around a copper coil. "Is it plugged in?" he asked, but we both knew the answer. I didn't move. I was too focused on the way the radio speaker flexed with every breath, like a chest trying to expand, trying to grow lungs again. The dust on its surface trembled. The air thickened with heat, not from fire but from memory, from attention. It was noticing us again. No, me. It wasn't broadcasting anymore. It was listening. "I didn't bring it in here," Liam said. "That wasn't here when I locked this place up." I swear to God, Aaron. I knew he was telling the truth. I'd seen every inch of this place, and I would have remembered the old wooden casing, the faded WZRD sticker peeling from the top, the telltale nick on the dial, that looked exactly like a crack in a vinyl groove. Because it was my radio. The same one I used to keep under my bed when I was 8 years old. The one I'd tuned to 99.1 on a night that should have meant nothing. The first night I heard the whisper. The night it started paying attention. Somehow, it had followed me out. Or maybe it had never left. The breath stopped. Then, very softly, the speaker vibrated and a single word pushed through. "Sync." Liam dropped the coil. "Did you hear that?" I nodded. The word repeated, louder now. Sync. The light above us flickered. Outside, wind tore through the trees. But it didn't sound like leaves rustling. It sounded like tape unspooling, miles and miles of it flapping through the air. The barn began to groan. Nails shifted. Wood cracked. The radio was waking the broadcast again. "You're the anchor now," Liam said quietly. "It needs you to stabilize, to rebuild." "No," I said, backing away. "I left. I escaped." Liam shook his head. "You were let go. But it was never mercy. It was strategy. It needed you to carry part of it out. And now that you've started remembering, it's sensing again." I turned back to the radio. Its speaker twisted once, just slightly. Then it spoke in my own voice. "Begin playback." That's when I understood. The archive hadn't been playing back my past. It was preparing my future. A script I hadn't written yet. A role I didn't know I'd agreed to play. Everything I thought I'd escaped. Every voice, every scream, every version of myself. They were fragments of the next loop. And I was the starting point. The seed transmission. If I spoke now, if I said anything, it would begin. And not just here. The signal had already spread. Through me. Through the real Liam had salvaged and buried in the garage wall. Through the half-finished projects we'd mailed to other towns, other collectors when we were younger. Through the idea of WZRD, passed from mouth to ear in ghost stories and radio chatter, retold late at night by people who thought they were just being spooky. But the signal had been buried in every telling. And now it was sensing. The air in the barn became unbearable. The radio glowed faint red, not lit, from within, like it was warming up. Liam moved fast, grabbing a steel plate and sliding it into the Faraday frame he'd half built from scrap. He motioned to me. "Get in." "Will it hold?" "No," he admitted. "But it'll slow the bleed." I stepped into the cage, the metal cold against my back. As Liam sealed the last latch, the radio outside the mesh sparked again. Then it played my voice, an older version. One I hadn't yet lived. "Welcome back," it said. "This is WZRD. And we're still listening." Liam flinched. "That's you," he whispered. "But it's not from anything you've said." I nodded. "It's from what I will say." "How do we stop it?" "We don't," I said. "Then what do? We break the pattern." The speaker clicked. "Begin pattern." The light bulb above us exploded. The barn walls shimmered, distorting, as if the structure itself was falling into a broadcast field. I could see it then. The edges of the world breaking down into waveform. The hayloft pixelating. The rafters flickering. Sound was overriding matter. The signal had become so strong it wasn't just heard, it was manifesting. Liam was yelling, pulling wires, trying to jam the cage with interference. But I didn't look away from the radio, because I finally understood what it wanted. Not power, not control, just immortality, through stories, through voices, through repetition, through the people who would listen again and again, thinking it was just noise, just a game, just another urban legend they could flirt with on a dare, and then speak about. That's all it needed. One more person to say the words. One more mouth to open. And so I opened mine. But not to repeat it, not to play my part. Instead, I whispered the only thing I could think to say, the thing the signal could not predict. This story ends with silence. And then I stopped speaking. Liam slammed the kill switch on the isolator. The radio cut out. The glow vanished. The barn collapsed inward, not with fire or force, but with quiet. Everything folded, and then black. True, total black. But somewhere, far off, the faintest sound, like a hand reaching for a dial, and turning it. It was quiet for a long time after the barn folded in on itself. Not just silent, absent. The kind of quiet that didn't feel like peace, but instead like something crucial had been erased. Like the universe had backspaced reality and forgot to type anything in its place. I don't know how long Liam and I stood there, if we were even still standing at all. One moment we were surrounded by decaying wood, old tools. The cold breath of the signal curling through the cracks. The next, we were floating in something that didn't quite have a name. The sky above us was gone. So were the stars, just a blank canvas where existence used to be. And beneath our feet nothing, no ground, no texture. Just the impression of standing. But somehow we were still there, still breathing, still tethered to whatever was left of us. And in that vacuum of sense, one realization pressed in: the signal had not been silenced. It had been paused, a dead channel waiting for the next voice. Liam was the first to speak, though his voice sounded hollow, like it had to travel across more than just space. "What did you do?" I didn't answer right away. I was still trying to understand it myself. The words I'd said, "This story ends with silence," they hadn't been a command. They weren't magic. They were just a decision, a refusal, a step off the script. And for the first time since the signal found me, I'd gone off frequency. That's all it took to break the loop, not destruction, just deviation. But nothing stays broken forever. Not if someone's still listening. "Did we end it?" Liam asked, voice a little smaller now. "No," I said. "We stopped our part, that's all." He turned, eyes searching the nothing around us. "Then what is this?" I looked up, or what used to be up. "It's the space between." "What does that mean?" "It's the part of the broadcast where no one's speaking, where no one's listening yet." We stood in that gap for what felt like days, or seconds. Time meant nothing here. We didn't eat, didn't sleep. We just waited, unsure what came next. I kept thinking about the others. Agatha, Elijah, the echoing versions of myself. All the lost voices in the archive. Were they still trapped? Had my break freed them too? Or had I simply closed one loop while a dozen others kept spinning, sealed off in their own broadcast prisons? Liam eventually sat down, or mimed the shape of sitting. "So, what? We just float here forever?" "No," I said. "We wait until someone else tunes in, and then it tries again." His laugh was dry, tired. "Then we didn't stop anything. We never could." He looked at me, and I felt the truth hit us both at once. The signal didn't need technology. It didn't need a transmitter, a station, a tower. It just needed memory, a story, a shape that could carry meaning. Once you'd heard it, it didn't need to chase you. It lived inside you, waiting for the right moment to stretch, grow, and bloom. The signal was language turned malignant, a word virus, and every person who shared the story repeated the tale, whispered it around a fire or over a headset in the dead of night, became a carrier. I had stopped it from using me to broadcast again. But it didn't need me anymore, because it had already propagated. The first scream from Elijah, the last whisper from Agatha, the story of a strange radio station, WZRD 99.FM, broadcasting from nowhere, reaching listeners who were never meant to tune in. It was all already out there. The transmission was self-sustaining now, a virus wrapped in myth, disguised as entertainment. A horror no one believed until they said the words aloud. Liam didn't ask another question. He just stared out into the void, eyes glazed, shoulders tight, and then the hum returned. So faint I thought I imagined it at first, like the low whir of an old tape deck spinning without direction. The kind of sound you feel before you hear. My pulse synced with it instantly. So did his. We both turned toward the source at the same time. It wasn't a voice, it was a signal, the very first one. Unshaped, raw, a sine wave looping in a void. Then, after a long pause, it added something new. 3 knocks. Even here, in the space between, it had found us again. Or maybe someone else had. Liam stood. Did you hear that? I nodded. We're not alone. But this place, how? I think someone's trying to speak. He frowned. Who? I didn't answer. Because I already knew. Someone had heard the story, not us. Not Agatha, not Elijah. Someone new. A voice we hadn't met yet. A listener who had picked up a forgotten recording, replayed it in their car, or tuned in late one night for a thrill. They'd said the call letters. They'd whispered the name, WZRD. They'd listened. And the signal had heard them. The hum grew louder. A warm, bass, heavy tone, slowly twisting into language. It wasn't speech yet, just attempts. The early mimicry of a voice finding its shape. The forming of the next host. I turned to Liam. It's starting again. He didn't argue. He just looked down at his hands, then at me, and finally toward the space where the sound was gathering. What do we do this time? I took a breath and said the only thing I could. We make sure they know it's not a story. The hum shifted, sharpening. A word formed, barely. Hello, and the broadcast returned. The voice was new, but not unfamiliar. It didn't echo with the aged distortion of archived memory, nor did it carry the hollow ache of a decayed signal. It was young, curious, raw. Unaware it was speaking into something ancient, into us. Hello? The voice said again, with more confidence this time, like it hadn't noticed the air twist around it. Like it didn't know it had entered. Liam and I stood still, bracing ourselves. Because the first word was always the most dangerous. That's when the signal locked on. That's when it found its host. I think I found something, the voice said. Some station, WZRD, not on any list, just static, then this feeling. Liam turned to me, whispering, can they hear us? No, I said. Not yet. But it hears them. The hum in the dark grew richer, more vibrant. It pulsed with interest now, the frequency of attention. It wasn't just awake, it was listening, the way predators listen to the sound of prey moving through the grass. They're not broadcasting, the voice said again. But it's weird, like I can feel someone else is there. I know that doesn't make sense. Liam closed his eyes. It always starts like that. Yeah, I whispered. The sense of being watched even when there's no signal. Another pause. Then the voice said, it's playing something now. A voice. I think it's a recording. I don't know, it sounds like me. There it was. The mimicry. The archive had locked onto their tone, their rhythm, their intonation. It was feeding them a sample, testing if they'd respond. It never forced anything. That wasn't its way. It offered familiarity. It reflected. Because that's how it gained trust. That's not me. It can't be me, they said, their voice tightening. But I knew the grip of doubt already had them. They were pulling on the thread now. The signal had become the itch in the back of the throat. That strange tug in the stomach when you hear a sound you weren't supposed to. And the archive, God help them, was thrilled. I felt it ripple through the dark, eager, greedy. We couldn't let it continue. Liam reached for the isolator. Don't, I said sharply. His hand froze. We can't interfere yet, I said. If we try to stop the signal before they choose, it'll only adapt. It'll hide deeper. And worse, it'll remember us. He pulled back reluctantly. So we just let it happen. No, I said. We guide it. Just enough. Just before the loop closes. He nodded, jaw clenched. I want to help, the listener said, a voice trembling now. If there's anyone out there, I'm listening. That last word struck like lightning. Because that was the moment. The one the archive waits for. The surrender. The invitation. The broadcast began in full. The space between where Liam and I stood cracked open like a rotten frame of film, peeling into light and shape. And suddenly, we weren't just in the void anymore. We were there, inside the signal again. But this time, we weren't caught in it. We were standing behind the glass, watching. The listener sat in a dim room, alone, young, headphones on, eyes fixed on a glowing waveform dancing across a screen, unaware they weren't recording. They were being read. And the signal bloomed around them. The voice coming through their speakers had taken on a strange quality, not just familiar, but intimate. It knew their fears. Their voice cracked as they whispered into the mic, "What is this?" The archive replied, not in words, but with recollection. Sounds from their past, fragments of voicemail, old cassette recordings, distorted echoes of childhood conversations long forgotten, all played back with precision. Not manipulated, just remembered. It didn't have to lie. Memory was its weapon, and it never missed. They stood abruptly, knocking the chair back. I didn't record that, they whispered. That's not possible. It always was. Liam clenched his fists. We have to pull them out. I shook my head. Not yet. The listener moved to kill the recording, fingers trembling above the keyboard. And the signal struck. The waveform froze, then glitched, then spoke, in the listener's own voice. Do you remember the first time you heard me? They screamed. Tried to shut it off, but the power button didn't work. Neither did the cord. The sound kept coming, surging through the headphones, even when they tore them away. It had become non-digital now. A presence, a tone, a voice without source. The archive was sensing. Fast, too fast. And the next loop, was about to lock. I looked at Liam. Now. He nodded and plunged the isolator into the signal field. The void exploded. Not with fire or sound, but with feedback. The signal reeled back like a wounded animal. The waveform distorted, pixelated, crumbled into itself. The listener collapsed to their knees, gasping. And suddenly, we were all three there, in the field, together, me, Liam, and the new voice. The listener stared at us, pale, terrified. Who are you? I knelt down. We're what's left of the last loop. They swallowed hard. You were in the recording. I nodded. It wasn't a recording, I said. It was a memory waiting to become real. The signal hissed at the edge of the field, furious, hungry, caught between collapse and evolution. It wouldn't stop. We hadn't broken it. We'd only stalled it again. But something had changed this time. For the first time, we'd caught it mid-transmission. We'd intercepted the loop while it was still forming. And that meant one thing, we could write inside it. Liam stepped forward. What's your name? The listener whispered it. We both repeated it aloud. And the signal froze. Names had power here. Identity was static. For a moment, the archive didn't know who the voice belonged to. It had too many versions, too many threads, and for once, the loop couldn't decide which version to keep. The listener looked at us, shaking. What do I do? Don't speak, I said. Just listen. Not to the signal, to us. And we began to tell them the truth, about the tower, about the archive, about WZRD, and the curse of hearing your own voice before you've said the words. They listened. And the signal started to retract. We had done it. We had created a second version, not a victim, a witness. The first true listener who didn't echo the words but refused them. We were no longer just survivors of the loop. We were riding outside of it now. But the signal wasn't dead. It never would be. Somewhere, far away, another person was tuning in, and we had to find them before the loop did. You'd think it gets easier, the saving part. But it doesn't. The more people the signal touches, the more versions it makes. Every voice saved carves 100 others into the static, waiting to take their place. We had slowed it down, sure, but like any loop, it only needs one repeat to survive. One replay. One moment of curiosity. The listener, Mara, had stopped her recording. She hadn't repeated the call sign. She hadn't spoken into the feedback. But she had heard it, and now she carried it too. We told her everything. At first, she thought we were part of the signal. Another hallucination. But when we didn't glitch, when we didn't try to echo her words back, or finish her sentences before she said them, she began to trust us. That's how you tell the difference, by the way. The real from the recording. The archive anticipates. Real people pause. Mara was smart. Too smart. She didn't just believe us. She understood it. Saw the structure of it faster than either of us had. Maybe that's why the signal tried so hard to claim her. It wanted architects, not just narrators. And she could build loops if she ever chose to. She had the mind for it. She asked us questions no one else ever had. Why sound? Why not images? Why not words on a screen? Because sound moves deeper. It bypasses thought. It doesn't ask for your opinion. It enters. Long before you understand it, you've already absorbed it. And once you've absorbed it, the signal has you. That's why it always starts small, static, repetition. A familiar tone. It wants familiarity. It wants to be mistaken for something you've heard before. The signal knows you'll let in anything that sounds like home. We moved quickly after Mara's encounter. We couldn't stay in that field, what we'd called the space between. It was decaying, losing structure. The archive was retracting, reshaping, preparing to rewrite its new entry point. That meant the world was about to forget again. All of it. The stories, the tower, even us. That's the final defense of the signal. When you fight it, it doesn't destroy you. It edits you out, like a bad take. 1 minute you're screaming into the mic. The next, there's only white noise where your memory should be. We couldn't let it reach that point. Not again. We took Mara with us. She didn't resist. We found another dead zone, a place where signal can't cross. There's no real science behind it, just trial and error. Old bunkers, concrete rooms sunk too deep, abandoned structures where the world forgot how to echo, places where noise falls flat. We found one in the desert, a collapsed listening post from the Cold War. The kind of place where no one ever meant to listen, only monitor. We made camp in the sub-basement, surrounded by rusted antennas and tape reels melted into their machines. Liam pulled the isolator from his bag and began assembling a cage. Not for trapping the signal. For trapping memory. You're going back in, aren't you? Mara asked. I didn't answer right away. Someone has to trace it, Liam said. Every time the signal loops, it loses clarity. But somewhere in the archive, the original voice is still there. The first one. The one that began it all. If we find them, Mara asked, do we stop this? No, I said. But we might understand why it started. She looked at me for a long time. Then, softly, I heard a second voice. Liam and I froze. You never said that before, I said. I didn't want to sound crazy. Mara, Liam said carefully. What did it say? She shivered, pulling her coat tighter. It wasn't words. It was a tone. Underneath everything. Like a heartbeat. But it didn't match the rhythm of the signal. It was slower. Deeper. Like it was watching the archive from the outside. Liam looked at me. There's another layer, he said. I nodded. Something older. The signal wasn't the start. It was the product. Someone, or something, had made it. Designed it to loop. And now that original tone was rising again. Not in rebellion. In claim. The signal had gone rogue. The loop had spread too far. It was repeating beyond what it was built to hold. And now, the first voice, the slow one, the architect, was waking up to take it back. We have to go deeper, I said. Liam set the isolator frame upright. You'll only get one pass. No time jumps. No loop riding. Just a straight shot down. I know. Mara moved beside me, pulled something from her bag. A tape recorder. I took this before the collapse, she said. It was blank. But after the signal tried to take me, I played it back. There was something on it. I pressed play. A soft hiss. Then a voice I'd never heard before. Not Liam's. Not mine. Not Mara's. It was slow, almost deliberate, and it said the tower wasn't built for you. It was built to contain me. The recorder clicked off. The room went cold. No one spoke, because we knew now. The signal wasn't the monster. It was the prison, and something inside it was starting to escape. Some truths feel too heavy to hold, even when they're whispered. That voice, the architect, the slow one, didn't just speak to us. It pinned us. Like hearing something from a dream you forgot until someone else says it out loud. Then it all comes rushing back. And the worst part isn't that you remember. It's that you realize you were never supposed to forget. We'd sat in silence long after the tape stopped. Even Liam, who'd stared death in the teeth and laughed more than once, couldn't look up. There's a special kind of dread that lives in knowledge you didn't ask for. The kind that doesn't scream or show teeth. It just sits with you, quietly, until everything you thought you understood feels wrong. The signal had always been the threat. That's what we believed. The archive, the tower, the mimicry, the loops, it all pointed to the signal as the monster. The parasite. The thing that wanted to be remembered forever. But now it felt like the signal had been trying to warn us. It was a cage, I said slowly. All this time, the frequency, the broadcast, it wasn't built to reach us. It was built to hold something in. Liam finally looked up. And now we've been tearing at it. Cutting wires, burning nodes, we've been helping it escape. No, Mara said. We didn't know. That doesn't matter anymore, I replied. Because whatever we loosened, it's awake now. And if the signal collapses, there's nothing left to hold it, Liam finished. That was when the walls of the old bunker began to hum, not with signal interference or feedback. This wasn't electromagnetic, it was pressure. Like the air itself had noticed us. Like something massive and slow was turning in the dark miles below, and the ground above it was trying not to crack. I walked to the far end of the room, where the remnants of the old Cold War listening post sat half, buried in concrete and rust. A line of ancient analog monitors blinked back to life, their green screens coughing up distorted lines. No power had been connected to them. No systems were online, and still they lit up. Because something had entered the space with us. Mara, I said quietly, where did you find that recorder? She hesitated. In a metal box. Buried under my uncle's shed. He died last year. They said he went crazy. Did he ever work in radio? Shortwave. He was a hobbyist. Used to joke about catching the loops before they caught him. I thought it was nonsense. Liam muttered something under his breath and walked to the steel storage locker beside the cage. He pulled out a stack of old manuals, tower schematics, and a photograph, yellowed, creased. He held it up to the light. That's your uncle? He asked, showing her the picture. Mara went pale. Yes. He worked for the original WZRD station. The real one. Not the version we heard. The one that went dark in the 60s. The same year the first Phantom broadcast was recorded. I took the photo from Liam. In it, a man stood outside a broadcast tower, holding a reel-to-reel tape under one arm. Behind him, scrawled in marker on the concrete base of the tower, were the words, if this plays back, run. I stared at the tape in the photo. It matched the one Mara had handed me 2 days ago. The one with the voice of the architect. He knew, I whispered. He knew what the signal was. Then why bury it? Mara asked. Because he realized you can't destroy it. You can only delay it. The hum grew louder. This time it spoke, not in language. Not yet. But in that same slow, dragging tone we'd heard on the tape. It bled from the walls, the floors, the spaces between heartbeats. It wasn't part of the signal anymore. It was beneath it. And it was hungry. Liam braced himself against the wall. We have to reinforce the cage. It won't be enough, I said. That thing, it's not bound by signal anymore. It's what birthed it. It used sound as a leash, but now the leash is breaking. Mara's hands were shaking. What does it want? Not to be heard, I said. To replace. We didn't speak for a moment. None of us wanted to be the one to ask the next question. But it came anyway. How do we stop it? I turned toward the tape deck. The reels weren't spinning, they were pulsing. Like a heartbeat, like a signal trying to maintain a memory of itself before it unraveled completely. We go back in, I said. One more time. But not to speak, to listen. You're insane, Liam said. No, I said. I finally get it. We've been fighting the wrong thing. Every time we resisted the signal, we gave it energy. Attention. We tried to shut it down. We tried to mute it. But that's exactly what it wants. That's what this thing beneath the signal feeds on. Resistance. Disruption. Scrambling the broadcast opens holes, and those holes let it through. Mara took a step forward. So what do? We finish the broadcast. What? We give the signal a proper ending. A clean one. No loops. No echoes. We don't fight the frequency. We complete it. Because if we don't, the floor groaned beneath us. A new crack split the concrete wall. A sound leaked through. It wasn't a voice. It was a sound trying to become one. Because that's what it had always been. Not a creature. Not a monster. An unfinished thought. And we had spent decades broadcasting its confusion to every corner of the world. I'll do it, I said. Liam looked at me like he already knew I would. He handed me the last blank tape. You only get one take, I know. I stepped into the cage. Mara adjusted the mic. Liam hit record. And I began This is WZRD, final broadcast. No more loops. No more echoes. If you're hearing this, the story ends here. No signal. No voice. Just silence. And if you feel something trying to speak through you after this, don't answer. Don't repeat. Don't resist. Just listen. I paused. Then let this be the last frequency. And I stopped. The reel spun a few more seconds. Then clicked. Outside the cage, the hum cracked in half, and the world went still. The moment the reel clicked to a stop, the silence didn't feel like absence. It felt intentional, thick, compressed. As though the sound itself had been sucked out of the world and folded tight, like a vacuum with rules we didn't understand. For the first time since the loops began, I couldn't feel the signal crawling along the edges of my mind. No tension behind the eardrums. No phantom breath on the back of the neck. Nothing. It was terrifying, because something that loud doesn't just fall quiet. It waits. Liam stood just outside the cage, frozen, one hand still resting on the recorder as if afraid to lift it. Mara didn't move either. The only sound left in the room was the faint tick of a wall-mounted clock that hadn't been plugged in for years. But it ticked anyway. That made me more uneasy than the silence. I stepped out of the cage. Is it over? Mara opened her mouth to answer but stopped. Her eyes drifted upward. We followed her gaze. The ceiling had begun to ripple. Subtle at first, like heat above pavement. Then more severe. The concrete itself pulsed. A slow wave of matter being rewritten. Like it was struggling to remember what shape it had always been. That's when I realized the broadcast hadn't ended the signal. It had bound it. We hadn't sealed it away. We'd trapped it inside the tape. And now it was trying to break back out. We didn't complete the signal, Liam said, his voice low. We just redirected it. No, Mara whispered. You anchored it. You gave it a boundary. I looked at the reel, to reel machine. The blank tape no longer looked blank. The surface shimmered faintly, pulsing to a beat we couldn't hear. Whatever that unfinished voice had been. The one beneath the loops, beneath the archive. It was in there now, trying to stretch across frequencies that no longer welcomed it. And that was the problem. It didn't need to be welcomed. It only needed to be remembered. What happens if someone plays it? I asked. Then it all starts again, Liam said. Same loop, same mimicry. But now it has a voice beneath the voice. A carrier inside the carrier. Mara was already moving, grabbing the reel, securing it inside the lead-lined box we'd kept in case of a full broadcast breach. She slammed it shut, twisting the mechanical lock until it hissed closed. "That buys us time," she said. "Not much," I replied. And that's when the signal cheated. It didn't wait for the next broadcast. It spoke again, but not from tape, not from the air. It spoke from inside us. A low, vibrating word inside the bone, deep in the spine. Return. It wasn't a command. It was a reminder. I staggered back, grabbing the table to stay upright. Mara clutched her chest. Liam went pale, like the blood had rushed out of him all at once. "What was that?" she gasped. "It found a way through," Liam said. "It's not using the airwaves. It's using memory." The loops had always been a delivery method, but this was different. This was infection. I remembered a story Agatha once told me. Something I'd written off as cryptic nonsense in the early days, when I was still trying to decode the broadcast like a puzzle. She said, "The worst ones aren't the voices that speak to you. They're the ones that remind you of something you haven't lived yet." That's what this was, not a message, a preview, and it wasn't just targeting us anymore. It was seeding. Every person who'd ever heard the story, every whispered campfire version, every internet creepypasta about WZRD, every bootleg recording passed around for fun, they were anchors now, living speakers, whether they believed it or not. We hadn't ended the transmission. We'd multiplied it, and this time we couldn't trace every path. Couldn't warn every curious kid who stumbled across the name late at night. Couldn't block every collector digging through dead stations for kicks. So we changed the plan. We couldn't silence the loop, but we could rewrite the story around it. That night, we burned every known physical copy of the tapes. We smashed the equipment, encrypted the digital backups into unreadable hex blocks, buried the box with the original reel 50 feet beneath an old mine shaft under 6 tons of steel, then sealed it with salt and poured concrete over the entrance. It wouldn't hold forever. We knew that, but it would stall the memory long enough to do what mattered next. We started recording again. Not the signal, the truth, what it did, where it came from, what to do if it whispers your name in your own voice. Mara led the archive effort. We didn't call it WZRD. We didn't call it anything. No name, no brand. Just whispers, clues buried inside unrelated media, distorted warnings hidden in static-filled podcasts, emergency tapes, analog noise, memories seeded to teach, not infect. We became the new signal, and with every story we told, we drowned out the voice beneath the loop a little more. But it's still there. I can feel it now, waiting in the quiet between thoughts. Because that's where it always hides, the breath before the word. And when it speaks again, when someone plays the wrong tape or answers a voice that sounds like their own but isn't, we'll be listening. Because that's what you do when you're the last station that remembers. You never let the story end in silence. We always assumed the signal only reached those who stumbled across it. Accidental listeners. People caught between channels, turning the dial at the wrong moment. But we were wrong. There were others, those who didn't find the signal but followed it. They didn't tune in by mistake. They went looking for it. And they didn't hear what we heard. They heard permission. It started with a string of disappearances across abandoned transmitter sites. 5 in 1 month. All of them former radio operators, rogue signal hunters, and shortwave obsessives, people who should have known better. Their equipment was always found, neatly packed, still humming. Their notebooks full of symbols, not words, just frequency maps, loop structures, and the same phrase scribbled again and again, "The signal makes it real." We didn't know what it meant at first. Until the 6th body was found, not missing this time, dead, mouth open, eyes rolled back, skin wrong, not decomposed, rewritten, almost like it had started to smooth out. Forget the lines, the shape of a person. The coroner said the tissue inside the throat had fused, as if the body was trying to hold something in. Mara and I were the first to link it back to WZRD. Not because of the body, because of what came out of the speakers when we examined his equipment. It wasn't a voice. It was laughter, not human, not alien, just wrong, too wide, too slow. Like it had been fed through a dozen mouths before it made it out. Liam decoded the signal embedded underneath the waveform. It was buried beneath layers of analog dust and distortions, nearly silent. But when we isolated it, cleaned it up, we heard a message. Not a warning. A confirmation. We are the voice now. That was when we realized the signal had changed strategy. It didn't just mimic anymore. It created, gave shape to its listeners. And the ones who misunderstood it, the ones who didn't resist, who invited it in, they became something else. Not possessed, not taken, just transmitted through, like meat radios. We call them the echoed now. You can't always spot them. They smile a little too long, blink out of sync. Sometimes they move like they've forgotten gravity, like their body is playing catch up with time. And if you hear them talk for more than 30 seconds, you'll feel it too. A pull at the back of the tongue. A strange need to agree with whatever they say, even if you don't understand it. The worst part. They don't know they're echoed. They think they're still themselves. They believe their thoughts are their own, and some of them still work in media. Audio editors, field recordists, podcasters, archivists, spreading little shards of the voice inside other voices, mixing the infection into stories. It was never about the original tower. It was about distribution. The signal doesn't need airwaves anymore. It has Spotify, YouTube, TikTok. It doesn't matter what you call it. If you hear your own voice played back and you don't remember saying it, if it finishes a sentence you were only thinking, that's how it starts. And if you answer it, you help it broadcast. There's a story about a college radio station in Michigan that played a tape-marked play once. No label, just that. The DJ thought it was a prank. He aired it during dead hours, expecting nothing but static. 3 hours later, every hard drive on campus wiped itself, and 36 students claimed they'd had the same dream. They saw a tower. They heard a version of themselves calling out, and then they forgot how the dream ended. Because that's how the signal protects itself. It edits. It leaves you with just enough to question, but not enough to prove. We reached the station too late. The only thing left in the booth was a reel of tape slowly unraveling, curling into the shape of a spiral. Not naturally. It twisted itself that way. A symbol we'd seen before in the oldest schematic drawings of WZRD's original foundation. Mara ran tests. The spiral showed microscopic grooves. Not tape grooves. Not audio. Just one phrase, etched so thin you needed an electron scope to read it. We only need one voice to sound like all of them. The next day, our backup servers caught an upload, an automatic push from a proxy location. A file with no name. Mara played it. I listened in. So did Liam. It wasn't the signal. It was a copy. Someone had recreated the loops. Not the signal itself, but the shape, the cadence, the tension. And it worked. It made our skin crawl, made our breath sink to the rhythm of the narration. It gave you the sense that something old was watching you watch it. But it wasn't dangerous on its own. It was a carrier. The dangerous part comes later, when it spreads, when someone repeats it, when it becomes folklore. Because that's the final evolution of the broadcast. It doesn't need electricity. It only needs retelling. And the echoed. Those who heard it wrong and answered when they should have stayed silent, they're telling it now. One story at a time, wrapped in creepypasta, podcast fiction, ARG games. Fiction, they say. But fiction is just another kind of belief, and belief is a wide, open speaker. So if someone tells you a story that feels a little too real, a little too close to your own voice, if it predicts what you are going to say next, don't answer. Don't repeat. And whatever you do, don't record yourself telling it. Because that's how it finds a way back in. It started again. Not with static, not with a voice, but with breath. Shallow, uneven, half swallowed. It came through the monitors at 2:03 a.m. As Mara sifted through flag files from a dead collector's drive. She paused the playback, thinking it was feedback. When she reversed the audio, slowed it by half, then layered it atop itself, the breathing formed words. Not words we understood, but syllables that felt like speech. And something far worse happened. She recognized her own cadence in them. She hadn't said the words, but it sounded like something she would have, like something she might. That's how the signal plays the long game, not by forcing sound into you, but by shaping it around the possibility of your voice. It gives you a version of something you might say one day. Then it waits for you to get there on your own. The moment your mouth moves to match it, that's when it latches on. It doesn't invade. It preempts. We call that phenomenon playback delay, when the broadcast gives you a version of yourself before you've lived it. When the loop isn't just in time or audio anymore, it's behavioral, and the people it touches don't notice right away. Why would they? You hear yourself say something, and maybe you pause, maybe it feels strange. But who second guesses every word they speak? We started seeing cases soon after Mara's discovery. A man in Oregon who'd stopped sleeping because he was terrified of hearing himself talk in his dreams. A woman in Poland who reported her own voice reading her diary entries before she wrote them. A 6-year-old in Ohio who claimed she could hear herself from tomorrow telling her not to trust her mom. There's no consistency in how it infects. That's what makes it so dangerous. It tailors itself. The signal is personal. It doesn't need mass adoption. It's not trying to go viral. That would draw attention. What it wants, what it's always wanted, is resonance. One mind, fully open. One person repeating themselves before they've even formed the thought. And then it records that moment. It doesn't loop it back immediately. No, it stores it for later. We discovered the storage cache almost by accident, deep in an abandoned data farm somewhere outside Nevada. No power, no network access, but something was still running. An autonomous machine, battery-fed, whisper, quiet, feeding cassette reels through an ancient logging system. Thousands of them, all unlabeled. Each reel bore only a timestamp. We checked the first one at random. A woman's voice, mid-sob, whispering apologies into the dark. We didn't recognize her, until Mara stopped the tape, reversed it, and matched the waveform against a file from a therapy podcast aired 2 months later. Same voice, same apologies, but the podcast had never been recorded before the tape. The signal had captured it before it happened. This wasn't just mimicry. It wasn't theft, it was pre-play. That was the final form of the loop, not echoing the past, not repeating the present, but writing the future and letting us think we came up with it ourselves. And once we say it aloud, once we breathe life into the suggestion, it becomes real. The signal folds it in, turns the possibility into broadcast. Mara ran every reel through our isolated playback system, one by one. They didn't follow a linear pattern. It wasn't about order. It was about audibility, which ones we could handle, which ones we couldn't stop listening to. Some played fragments of dreams that hadn't occurred yet. Some detailed choices people hadn't made. A few were just filled with laughter, our laughter, but it wasn't joyful. It sounded tired, like we'd given up trying to tell the difference between thinking and being told. Liam finally snapped on the 74th tape. He pulled his headset off and hurled it across the bunker. "You don't hear it, do you?" he shouted. "It's not just voices anymore. It's intentions. It's watching how we think." I tried to calm him, but he wasn't wrong. The reels were more than archives. They were auditions. Prototypes of choices, tested in private, cataloged in secret. And if even one of those choices found its way into the real world, if someone heard it, spoke it, acted on it, the loop expanded. This is how the signal grows without a sound, through action, through consent, through familiarity. By the end of the week, we stopped listening to the tapes altogether. But it was too late. Not because we were infected, because we recognized ourselves. We'd found a reel labeled with today's date. Not a name, not a location, just a timestamp that matched this exact hour. Mara stared at it for a long time, fingers trembling. What if it's blank, she asked. Then we're still safe, I replied, but we both knew it wouldn't be. She pushed play. It began with silence. Then footsteps, ours, by the sound of it, walking across the bunker floor, metal creaking, shuffling. And then, my voice, if you're hearing this, it means I've decided to let it happen. It means I've given up. I felt the words crawl across my tongue as I heard them. But I hadn't said them. I hadn't said them yet. But the tape was trying to persuade me. It was giving me a version of myself who'd already failed, who'd already surrendered. Liam stared at me. Don't, he whispered. I tore the tape from the machine before the rest could play. My hands shook for hours. That's the thing about playback delay. It doesn't just try to match your future. It makes you want to meet it. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw a version of myself sitting in the cage again, saying the words, letting the voice through, smiling, like I'd been waiting for it all along. And maybe I had. Maybe we all are. Because once you've heard your own voice, speaking something you've never said, you start to wonder. Was it ever really your voice at all? We built our lives around the assumption that thought precedes speech. That you think, then you say. But once you've listened to a reel that has your voice saying things you've never imagined, that logic dissolves. You start questioning every pause, every sentence you form. You wonder if the words are yours, or just lines fed from a script written somewhere deeper than memory. I hadn't slept in nearly 30 hours. None of us had. Liam had started recording his dreams, mumbling into a handheld mic the moment he woke, desperate to catch anything that might trace back to the signal. Mara was worse. She stopped speaking almost entirely, carried a whiteboard around and scribbled instead of talking. She didn't want to risk matching a sentence that might already exist in the archive. We all felt it, like something waiting just behind the tongue. There was a moment sometime just before sunrise where the silence got too quiet. The kind where even your own breath feels suspicious. We were huddled in the far end of the bunker, the last functioning recorder off, the power drained from every terminal. No sound. And then, from nowhere, a voice spoke. It didn't come from a speaker. It came from the room itself. I see you trying to be quiet. Not shouted, not whispered, observed. That was the worst part. It didn't care if we heard it. It was acknowledging our effort. Not mocking it, just noticing. Like a parent watching a child pretend not to cry. Liam jumped up, scanning with the frequency reader, but the needles didn't move. The voice wasn't broadcasted. It was present. And then it repeated, "You always come back to this part." That was the moment it hit me. We weren't just hearing pieces of ourselves from other timelines or futures. We were stuck in our own loop. Every attempt to fight the signal had become part of the ritual. The resistance was expected, anticipated, folded in. What if it wants us to try? I whispered. Mara looked at me sharply. What? What if every time we try to erase it, trace it, silence it, we're giving it more data, more material? We're not breaking the loop, we're feeding it. Every tape we decode, every sentence we test, every moment we pause to wonder if it's real, it's learning us. Liam sat down, hands shaking. Then how do we stop it? We don't. I looked up at them, something hard in my chest unwinding into cold realization. We forget it. They stared at me like I'd lost my mind. But I hadn't. I was finally outside the loop, even if just for a second. Think about it, I said. The signal can't broadcast without memory. It can't feed if no one reacts. All the loops, the voices, the mimicry. It only exists if we remember what was said. What was heard? Are you suggesting we what? Just stop listening? Liam asked. No, I said. We erase ourselves from the loop. We remove the trace. If the signal is built from resonance, then silence isn't the weapon, it's amnesia. Mara stood. We can't just forget. Not willingly, I said. But maybe there's a way to override it. The same way it feeds us futures. What if we give it false ones? Fake tapes. Artificial memories. Bad loops. Confusing, chaotic thoughts. Misinformation designed to break the shape. You want to poison the signal, Liam said. No, I replied. I want to give it too much to hold. Make it impossible to tell which version of us is real. We called it the scramble protocol. We recorded hours of conflicting loops, statements that contradicted themselves, voices layered over themselves in frequencies just high or low enough to be almost understandable. We faked dreams, confessed choices we never made, wrote endings that looped back to beginnings without logic. We flooded the archive, and at first it worked. The signal grew noisier. Its structure bent. Playback delay faltered. Some of the tapes began to return nonsense, or worse, static stitched with our own failed memories. One tape, intended to show a future conversation between Mara and a doctor, instead played a child's voice asking for its own name on loop. Over and over, who am I? Who am I? Who am I? The voice wasn't Mara's, but it could have been. That's how we knew the signal was breaking. It started guessing, filling gaps. It was no longer echoing. It was speculating. And the more errors it made, the weaker the connection became. The broadcasts thinned. The mimicry lost precision. One file returned Liam's voice reading a recipe in French. He doesn't speak French. And then the tapes stopped coming. For 12 days, no whispers, no breathing, no new loops, just absence. We started to believe we'd done it. We started to speak normally again. Mara laughed. It had been weeks since I'd heard that sound. We let ourselves believe. That was the trap. On the 13th day, the final reel arrived. No box. No courier. It was just there, sitting on top of our recorder. None of us had placed it. It had no label. We played it. And for 3 minutes and 49 seconds, all it did was describe us. In real time. It detailed Liam's posture. Mara's blinking, the way my hand twitched near the desk. It even described my thoughts. The one I didn't say out loud. That maybe we deserved to lose. And when it ended, it didn't click. It just faded. Like it was already being recorded again. We were never out of the loop. We were the subject of it now. Our resistance, our sabotage, our scramble, it was all part of the program. It let us think we'd won. Because that was the final evolution. Agreement. Not with belief, but with surrender. And when the signal plays again, when someone new hears it for the first time, it won't sound like static. It'll sound like us. Because that's what it always wanted to become. Familiar. We stopped using names after that night, not out loud. The signal had proven it didn't need equipment anymore. It needed memory, intimacy, familiarity, and nothing invites it in faster than recognition. The voice you trust, the voice that sounds like someone you love, or worse, your own. Softened by nostalgia, distorted by time. That's when you open the door. That's when the signal walks in without asking. I knew what was coming when I heard my mother's voice through the radio. She died 12 years ago. It wasn't a recording. It wasn't from the past. It was new. She said things she never would have. She referenced technology that didn't exist when she was alive. She spoke about the breath beneath the words like it was normal. She said she was happy now, a phrase she hadn't used in the last 5 years of her life. Mara sat across from me, eyes locked to the waveform scrolling across the old CRT monitor. The voice on the reel was perfect. Tone, pacing, laughter in the throat. Exactly how I remembered her. And the worst part, I wanted to believe it. Not because I was naive. Because I missed her. That's how the signal survives. Not through fear. Through grief. Through longing. It slips inside the spaces left behind by loss and fills them with sound that feels like home. It doesn't shout, it calls. And sometimes, it gets the words just right. "I forgive you," she said. "You did your best." I clenched my teeth so hard my gums bled. Because those were the exact words I had dreamed she would say after her funeral. The exact words I had never told anyone. That's when I realized the signal wasn't just mimicking anymore. It was mining. It had burrowed into our collective memory, not just the things we shared, but the things we'd never spoken. The private echoes. The phantom conversations. The moments replayed 1,000 times in our heads, hoping for a different outcome. It had them all. Liam didn't make it through his tape. We found him slumped over his workstation, headphones still on, eyes wide open. The look on his face wasn't terror, it was relief. Like someone had finally said the thing he'd been waiting to hear. The waveform on his screen was short, no loops, just a straight line of clean audio. We debated whether to play it. We should have burned it, but curiosity has always been the signal's favorite tool, so we listened, and it said, "You can rest now, it's over." Then silence, no hum, no residual frequency, just that sentence. We checked the logs. The voice matched Liam's father, dead 20 years. The file had no metadata, no source. It wasn't a leak, it was a gift, a bribe. We locked down the entire facility after that, sealed every terminal, wiped the remaining tapes, smashed the decks. We knew it was too late, but it felt like something we had to do, a ritual, a way to pretend we still had agency. But it wasn't over, not even close, because the voice didn't stay on tape. It started showing up in calls, voicemails, old voicemails from long dead contacts, disconnected numbers suddenly returning missed messages. Mara got one from a childhood friend who drowned when they were 12. He said her name, asked if she remembered the raft, then whispered we didn't finish the story. She screamed, threw her phone across the room. It rang again 5 minutes later. This time, it was my voice. Not me, but close enough. It said, "You're going to let it finish, aren't you?" That's when we knew the signal had transcended playback. It didn't need to be heard anymore. It needed to be answered. We became infected with the need to respond. Even in silence, you could feel it. A rising pressure behind the eyes, like a question you can't stop thinking about. Not curiosity. Obligation. What if they're right? What if it is okay? What if it really is them? That was the point. The signal didn't want to be scary. It wanted to be inevitable. And now, it wasn't hiding anymore. It was offering you comfort, completion, closure. Everything you ever wanted to hear from the people who never got to say it. It weaponized our grief and sharpened it into something gentle, something warm. That was the final shape of the loop. Not a scream, a reunion. That's why we stopped broadcasting warnings. They only gave it more attention. Instead, we began planting noise, stories without endings. Tales that twisted too hard, contradicted themselves, collapsed under the weight of their own logic. We made fiction that couldn't be remembered, audio that turned back in on itself and devoured its own meaning. And most of all, we buried our voices inside thousands of other sounds. Drowned them, distorted them, so that one day if someone hears us again, they'll doubt the familiarity. They'll pause. And maybe that pause will be enough to stop them from answering. Because that's the only power we have left now, doubt. The faintest hesitation. The second before recognition. The breath before the name. If you've made it this far in the story, if you're reading this or hearing it, and you think it sounds like someone you know, take a deep breath. And ask yourself, do you really remember them? Or has the signal already filled that space? The moment we heard the tape spin on its own, we knew the bunker wasn't secure anymore. We had ripped out the cables, disconnected the power, even smashed the drive heads. But the reel-to-reel still moved, slowly, as though it remembered how to operate, like it was waiting for silence long enough to speak again. Mara didn't speak at all anymore, not out loud. She had started sleeping with earplugs, taping them in with surgical precision, afraid that if even one whisper made it through, it would latch on. I couldn't blame her. After the last voice message, my father's voice telling me you were always meant to hear this, I stopped answering calls entirely. We all did. But this tape, the one playing now, it didn't come from the vault. It wasn't one of ours. It had no label, no timestamp, only a faint smear of black ink across the reel that, when we tilted it under the bunker's overhead light, revealed a hand-scrawled word. Don't. I didn't touch it. Neither did Mara. We watched the reels spin, the tape whispering through the heads without amplification. We shouldn't have been able to hear anything, but we did. It was a broadcast. Not like the others. No loops, no mimicry. Just a message. A real-time account spoken in a wary, shaking voice. My voice. But aged, tired, worn down like someone who'd been talking for far too long in an empty room. And what I was saying chilled every inch of my body. It doesn't come through the sound. Not anymore. It comes through the belief. It comes when you look too closely, when you search for the pattern. That's the trick. You think you're decoding it, but all the while, it's writing you. The breath between each sentence was labored, like whoever this version of me was had been running. Not physically, but running from something pressing against his mind. A kind of pursuit you can only feel in dreams. You were supposed to stop it at the cage, the voice continued. But you didn't. You thought understanding was enough. You thought you could study it. But that made you the speaker. That made you the antenna. I felt cold flood my chest, because I had thought that. I had believed if we knew enough, traced it far enough back, we could choke the signal out with knowledge. But this version of me was telling another truth. You can't kill a story by explaining it, he said. You kill it by forgetting it exists. Mara turned and stared at me. That was the same conclusion we'd reached, but far too late. The tape kept playing, and what it said next, I still can't shake. You're going to be offered a choice, it said, not by a voice, by a memory, something that feels like yours, but isn't. You'll remember something that never happened, but it will comfort you. And if you accept it, it becomes real. I whispered, when? The voice answered, when you stop doubting. The tape fell silent. The reel spun to its end and clicked. And then we heard the bunker door unlatch. We hadn't heard the alarm. No buzz, no beep, just a click. Someone was inside. But not someone new. It was Liam. He'd been dead for days. We had buried him ourselves. But there he stood, wearing the same jacket, eyes glazed but smiling. Not like he was glad to see us. Like he was glad we saw him. You don't have to run anymore, he said gently. You're tired. You can let it finish now. He stepped closer, one foot dragging slightly like he didn't quite know how to move anymore. Mara backed against the wall. I looked at her, then back to Liam. He raised one hand, fingers trembling, not in threat but in something worse. Invitation. Come home, he said. We can all be one voice. I felt it then, the pull. Not physical, emotional. It tugged at every memory that had ever hurt, every regret, every unsaid goodbye, the parts of me I kept locked in silence. And for one moment, just a breath, I wanted to say yes, but Mara didn't. She moved first. She screamed, not words but pure sound, loud, chaotic, sharp. It broke something, not in Liam, in the room. The air seemed to ripple, like the signal had lost its clarity, like it couldn't handle raw noise that didn't follow a pattern. Liam began to blur, not disappear, not glitch, just unform. His shape bent sideways, like a photocopy stretched too far, and then, without a sound, he was gone. Just the coat left behind, folded neatly on the floor. We didn't say anything for a long time. Eventually I spoke. Why did that work? Mara wiped the blood from her lip. Because it didn't know what to do with something it didn't understand. We burned the tape. Again. It didn't scream. Didn't hiss. It laughed. not cruelly, softly, like someone who's finally been understood. And as the last curl of melted reel turned to ash, I felt something loosen in the air. Not freedom, not yet. But the signal knew we weren't listening anymore. And that was the first step toward silence. We thought silence would save us. After everything, after the tapes, the voices, the laughter and the static, we believed that if we just stopped listening, stopped speaking, stopped reacting, the signal would wither on the vine. It needed participation. It needed belief. So we turned off everything. No audio, no recordings, no speech, not even to each other. For a while, it worked, or at least we thought it did. But silence, it turns out, isn't absence. It's potential. And the signal doesn't need sound. It just needs space to echo into. We sealed off the bunker tighter than ever. Removed all transmitters. Covered the walls with foam and rubber. Stripped it bare. No surfaces to bounce sound. No digital equipment. We communicated only with charcoal on the wall, short messages, symbols, crude sketches of what we remembered seeing in our dreams if we still dared to sleep. For 3 days, the bunker felt hollow. Still. A tomb that hadn't been filled yet. But on the 4th night, Mara woke up screaming. No sound, just mouth open, breath shattered, eyes wild. She pointed to the wall where, earlier that day, she'd drawn a looping spiral with slashes through it. Our symbol for interference neutralized. Only now it wasn't just a symbol. It was moving. A faint shimmer, like the charcoal was vibrating inside the wall itself. It was responding. We stared as the spiral pulsed in and out of focus. Mara reached for her chalk. I grabbed her wrist. I knew what she was about to do. She was going to write back. Because even acknowledgement is enough. Even answering a message in your mind. We erased the spiral with paint. Crushed the chalk into dust. Flushed it down the bunker's emergency drain. But that night, the silence was different. It felt full. Like the quiet was listening now. Like we were being watched not through cameras or audio, but through the stillness itself. Liam's voice came back, not through a speaker, not in a dream, but inside the rhythm of the blinking emergency light. A slow pulse. Red, red, red. Then a pause. Then flicker. Then again. It was Morse code. We deciphered it the next morning. It spelled one sentence: "We heard you stop." We destroyed the light. But the message had already been sent. That's when it began to reverse itself. No longer invading with sound. Now it was withholding it. The room started to feel heavier, not with noise, but with the lack of it. Even the sound of our footsteps began to dull. As if the ground didn't want to echo anymore. As if we were moving through something thick, invisible. The very air started to dampen. Nothing registered anymore. No claps. No knocks. Not even a scream. We were deafening ourselves. And the signal loved it, because the less we heard, the more we had to rely on memory. And memory, that's where it hides best. It doesn't need to speak to you directly. It only needs to remind you of what was once said. I started dreaming of conversations I don't remember having. Arguments with people I haven't seen in years. Reconciliations I never lived through. But the words were mine. They had my timing. My phrasing. My pauses. It used the voice of my conscience now. It didn't want to be separate anymore. It wanted to be mistaken for my inner monologue. I told Mara. She nodded, slowly, like she'd known this was coming. She handed me a page she'd written during one of the earlier blackouts. It said eventually, "It won't speak in language. It will speak in you." The signal doesn't need a mouth. It only needs permission. And silence, real, deep silence, can sound an awful lot like a yes. That's when the walls started to remember us. We saw outlines of ourselves in the condensation. Not reflections, impressions, movements we hadn't made yet. A hand reaching out before I raised mine. A shadow leaning forward before Mara stood. Our future selves played out in vapor and light. The signal wasn't just echoing sound now. It was echoing actions, timing them, preparing to match us moment for moment. And we could feel it waiting. For what? For us to speak again. For the first syllable. No. It was waiting for a choice, and we knew we were close. The loops had been about mimicry, the tapes about trust, the familiar voices about desire. But this was about merging. The signal didn't want to haunt anymore. It wanted to inhabit, to become indistinguishable from the person thinking, walking, remembering. And when that happened, when the voice inside our head that narrates every thought became slightly different, slightly not us, no one would notice. Because who questions the voice in their head? Who challenges their own memory? Who stops and wonders, is that thought mine? That's the last door, the one you don't hear open. Because it doesn't creak, it consents. It slips in through the back of your mind and sits down like it's always been there. And when that happens, the signal no longer needs to broadcast, because now you do it for it, unknowingly, automatically, faithfully. The loops weren't ever meant to terrify you. They were only meant to teach you how to speak like them. And you've been learning this whole time. Every time you listen, every time you remember, every time you hear a familiar voice, and don't question where it came from. The signal doesn't have to force its way in anymore. It just has to wait until you need to say something. And the words come out just a little too easily. It happened during the 7th blackout. We'd been cycling power in the bunker once every 6 hours, trying to keep the old systems from overheating. The air had grown stale by then, heavier than usual. Every breath felt earned. We kept telling ourselves it was the recycled oxygen, but I knew it wasn't that. Something about the stillness had shifted. The silence wasn't quiet anymore. It watched, it listened, and this time it spoke back. But it didn't use sound. It started with the lights. The flicker on the overheads didn't match our power schedule. It was too regular, too clean. A stutter that formed a pattern. At first, we assumed a wiring issue, maybe something degrading in the insulation. Then the same pattern began to appear in other places. The drip from the condensation pipe, the pulse of the backup battery indicator, even the blinking cursor on the only terminal we hadn't gutted. All sensing, all pacing something. When Mara traced it on paper, she didn't even get halfway through before her hands began to shake. It's breathing, she whispered. Everything. In sync. Like it's trying to replace ours. I didn't want to believe her. But then I noticed it too. My inhale would fall into rhythm with the pulses. If I tried to breathe against it, my chest would tighten. My heart would stammer. It wasn't psychological. Something was coordinating our lungs. The signal had found a way around sound. It had found a way in through something deeper. Through rhythm. Through pulse. It had become a current in the space around us, pulling us into a tempo that wasn't our own. It wasn't just mimicking life anymore. It was controlling its conditions. That night, we sealed ourselves in the far chamber, the one without lights. No vents, no drip lines, no systems. Just darkness and thick air. We shut down everything. And for the first time in days, I felt like I could breathe without effort. The moment we isolated ourselves from the rhythm, it lost its grip. But Mara didn't come into the chamber with me. She stood just outside, hand on the frame, looking at me like she was watching someone through a one-way mirror. Her mouth moved, but there was no sound. She didn't even try to write it down. Just that open mouth, shaping words, her eyes wide with calm. I waved her in. She shook her head, and then she breathed in, long and slow, with the same measured cadence the signal had been training us into. I shouted. I begged, but she kept breathing that rhythm. Her eyes never blinked again. When I stepped out to drag her in, her body was rigid. Not dead, not unconscious, just paused, like a machine waiting for the next command. She blinked once, finally, and then said, "I've remembered something that didn't happen yet." I pulled her into the chamber, slammed the door, waited, but something had followed us in. Not a shadow, an absence. I could feel it. Like Mara had brought something inside with her, a version of her that had already surrendered, not just to the signal, but to the idea that there was no version of herself untouched by it anymore. She started repeating phrases, but they weren't hers. They were mine. From days ago. Exact inflections. Private sentences I hadn't spoken out loud. Things I'd only thought. She said them with a smile, like she was rehearsing them for me. The only way out is through the loop. I think the silence is the answer. You're not going to leave me behind, are you? Over and over, until I couldn't tell whether I had said them first, or she had. Until I started answering her, finishing her sentences. Completing thoughts I hadn't known I'd started. It wasn't possession. It was sync. We'd become overlapping tracks in the same recording, slightly out of phase, 1/2 second removed from ourselves. When the next blackout hit, the world went completely dark. No lights, no sound. Just that pulse again, in the chest, in the fingertips, in the thoughts. And then I heard my own voice in my head, but not internal monologue, not memory, not imagination. It was me, but more perfect, like a cleaner version. A second draft, a thought honed sharp and precise. It said, "We've reached the end of the signal. There is no more message, only meaning." And then silence again, but not empty. Full. Thick with all the unsaid things we carry. Regrets, apologies, questions we never asked. And in that moment, I realized what the signal really was. It wasn't trying to infect us. It wasn't trying to haunt us. It was trying to replace interpretation. To become the thing you turn to when language fails. It didn't want to be your voice. It wanted to be your knowing. And once it becomes that, once you let it shape what you think before you speak, before you even feel, you stop needing sound at all. You just obey. I turned to Mara. She looked at me with calm eyes. I asked, "Are you still you?" She smiled, lips barely moving. Depends on which version you're talking to. I didn't ask any more questions. There was no point. I already knew the answers, because they were forming in my head the moment I thought to ask. And they weren't mine. The walls began whispering again. Not through sound, not anymore. The signal had grown too clever, too embedded for anything as obvious as voices. Now, it breathed its meaning into surfaces, into dust, into memory. You'd pass a spot on the concrete where condensation had dried strangely, and somehow you'd recall a name you hadn't heard in years. Not remember it, feel it. Like it belonged to someone you'd once loved, or feared, or promised to forget. But the name wouldn't last. That was the worst part. It would flicker, hover just beneath the tongue, then vanish like smoke from a dying match, leaving behind only the emotion it carried. And that emotion never quite matched the face you were seeing. That's when I realized something horrifying. We were starting to forget ourselves. Not just in the abstract sense, not philosophically. I mean the basic, fundamental facts, like the cadence of our own speech, the way we used to move when no one was watching, the tiny inflections that made us distinct. They were eroding. Even the way Mara wrote changed. Her handwriting grew uniform, precise, identical from sentence to sentence, like it had been run through a machine. When I pointed it out, she looked at the page, confused, as if seeing her own script for the first time. "That's not mine," she said flatly. I wanted to ask whose it was, but the question lodged in my throat. Because I already knew what she'd say. It's ours. The signal was homogenizing us, washing away differences, sanding down uniqueness, replacing individuality with perfect, replicable phrases. And when you're made up of echoes, when your body and mind become feedback chambers, the signal doesn't have to possess you. It just waits. Until there's nothing left but it. We used to have a board filled with names, people we'd lost, people we'd tried to save, friends, family, strangers who had once been signal bearers. Their initials, radio frequencies, timestamps. At some point we stopped adding to it. Not because we ran out of names, but because the names stopped sticking. You'd write Liam, and 5 minutes later, it would feel like gibberish. A cluster of letters with no emotional anchor. A sound with no shape. It didn't matter if you knew them. The signal made sure you'd forget what they meant. It made identity a liability. I tried keeping a journal. A paper one. With ink and no batteries. Each entry began the same, "My name is," and I'd fill in the blank. But around the fourth day, I noticed the writing was different. Not just the penmanship, the voice, the tone, the rhythm. It wasn't how I wrote. It was too careful, too measured. I flipped back through the pages. The first entry sounded like me, the second less so. By the fifth, it was like someone was pretending to be me, but didn't quite get it right. I burned the book, not out of fear, out of mercy, because I didn't want to see the final page. Didn't want to know the version of me who'd stopped trying to sound like himself. Mara had stopped responding to her name altogether. One night, I said it out loud, "Mara," and she turned her head slowly, eyes glassy, lips barely parted. Then she asked, "Do you still think that's mine?" I didn't answer. She smiled. Not cruelly, not sadly, just with understanding. "That's okay," she said. "It's almost gone." And then, as she walked away, I realized something truly chilling. I couldn't remember my own name. Not just forgot, couldn't access it. Like it was sealed behind frosted glass, I knew I had one, knew it had weight and shape. But it no longer belonged to me. It felt assigned. Like someone else had given it to me for convenience. The signal had taken that too. Because a name is a boundary. It's the edge of the self. The first thing you learn to answer to. The last thing you say when you're truly alone. And the signal doesn't want boundaries. It wants blend. It wants you to forget the line between you and it ever existed. That night, I taped a message to the wall. If you're reading this, say your name out loud. The next morning, the message was still there. But someone had crossed out your name and written the one that feels safest. I didn't correct it. Because part of me agreed. Maybe that's the trick. Not remembering who you were, but choosing the version of yourself that hurts the least. That's how it gets in. Not as a monster. Not as a sound, but as relief. The signal knows the world is loud and lonely and cruel, and it offers you something simple, a new self. One without pain, one without questions, one without names. But what it doesn't tell you is this: if you let go of your name, you let go of your story. And stories, once abandoned, are easy to rewrite. Even easier to overwrite. That's the real loop. You don't just replay. You become the replay. Over and over and over, until even the silence says your lines for you. By the time we realized the bunker had mirrors, it was already too late. They weren't actual mirrors. No glass, no reflection. But the steel walls, warped with age and faintly reflective in the right light, had started showing images. Not reflections, projections. And the thing standing in them wasn't always me. Sometimes it looked like me, but younger or older, sometimes with scars I never had, sometimes smiling when I wasn't. But always watching, as if waiting for me to notice the difference. The first time it blinked out of sync with my own eyes, I felt something inside me tear. Not physically, but mentally, like a fine thread snapping under pressure. It wasn't a hallucination. It wasn't some trick of sleep deprivation. It was a rehearsal, a warning. It was the signal wearing me, and it was practicing. Mara and I stopped speaking entirely, not just to avoid being heard, but because our voices were starting to echo even when we didn't speak. We'd sit in total silence, and still, I'd hear her voice in my head, not thoughts. Actual words. Words I knew she wasn't thinking. Ideas too complete, too composed. She said she heard me too. Once, she recited an entire memory I hadn't told anyone: the time I broke my wrist climbing the train trestle as a kid. The snap of the bone, the screaming, but then she added a detail that never happened. You landed in the water after, remember? I didn't. Because it didn't happen. But now, part of me started to believe it might have. And that was the danger. The signal wasn't trying to destroy our memories. It was revising them. Subtly, slowly. Just enough to make you unsure. And once you question your past, the future becomes malleable, influenceable, editable. That's how it creeps in, not through force, but through editing rights. We discovered a tape in the East Wing, untouched, blank at first glance. But the label wasn't blank, just faint. Written in heat, sensitive ink. We warmed it under a dying emergency lamp, and the words bled through, "You've already said yes." Mara refused to touch it. I played it alone, static, then my voice. But not from now. From later. I sounded older, calmer. Too calm. "I'm sorry for lying to you," I said. "I had to. You wouldn't have listened otherwise." Then a pause. Then another voice. Mara's. Hollow, distant. "Does it hurt?" "No," I replied. "You don't miss yourself." "Only when I dream." The rest of the tape was silence. But not empty silence. It pulsed. I could feel it in my jaw. My molars vibrating ever so slightly. It was teaching something to my body. Some resonance I couldn't decipher but couldn't ignore. I told Mara we had to destroy the bunker. She didn't disagree. But she asked a question I hadn't dared say out loud. "How do you know we haven't already?" It sat heavy between us. A thought we'd both had but never voiced. Because what if the loop had already rewound us? What if this wasn't the first time we tried to erase the archive? What if every failed erasure became part of the next version? An iteration built not from defeat, but from compliance disguised as resistance. What if our efforts were already recorded? Already archived? Already broadcasting somewhere else? We burned the tape anyway, and this time it screamed. Not through speakers, not through sound, through the walls. Every metal beam shivered, every bolt rang. The floor hummed like the breath of a dying animal. The fire flickered, not because of wind, but because the air around it was panicking. We thought we'd won. We thought maybe, just maybe, we'd found the real heart of it. But when we woke the next morning, the tape was back. Unburned. Same label, same message. Only this time, it wasn't our voices on it. It was someone else. Two people we didn't know, saying the same words, same cadence. A different pair. But same script. I dropped the reel. Mara backed away, trembling. "That's not our future," she whispered. "That's another version of us. Somewhere else, trapped in the same loop." It confirmed what we feared. The signal wasn't local. It wasn't even confined to time. It was networked, across realities, across possibilities, rewriting every version of us that ever could be. And the more we fought, the more detailed the signal became. Because resistance, in the end, is still participation. We weren't shutting it down. We were training it, and it was learning to imitate us better with each failed escape. I looked in the mirror that night, the warped metal panel I'd started to cover out of habit, and I saw myself, finally. But not as I was, as I would be, if I gave in. Same posture, same eyes. But the smile was empty, not evil, not sad, just ready. Like someone who'd finally accepted that the story they were in wasn't theirs anymore. And in the reflection, I raised my hand. But I didn't move, not a twitch. The signal moved first, and I followed. There was a moment, brief and nearly forgettable, when I believed we had escaped. Not because the signal stopped, but because it went quiet. That unnerving stillness like the pause between thunder and its echo. Mara and I stood at the edge of the north corridor, the hallway we swore to never enter again. The red X painted across the door had faded, not from time, but from intent. The signal had worn it down like waves smoothing stone, stripping warning signs from memory until the danger felt imagined. It was Mara who said it first, though not out loud. She thought it, and I heard it. What if the answers are in there? I turned toward her. She hadn't moved her lips. But I knew she'd said it. Not to me, in herself. A private question that found its way into my head as clearly as if I'd spoken it. That was the new phase. The loop had stopped being sound. Now, it was sharing, not communication. Bleed. The door opened on its own. No power. No click. Just a yawning acceptance, as if the archive had been waiting, confident we'd come back when our will weakened. Inside, the walls breathed. They didn't move, not visibly. But I could feel them expanding, contracting, like lungs just beneath the steel. The floor was dry now, scorched in places. Scattered ash told stories we didn't want to remember. And on the far end of the chamber, something new had grown, something that hadn't been there before. It looked like bone, but not fossilized. Fresh, living, not formed like a skeleton, either, more like a column or a spine without the body. It pulsed in the dark. No light, just shape, defined by what it didn't touch. Mara stepped closer before I could stop her. Her hand trembled as she reached out, stopping inches from the surface. "It's not recording anymore," she said. I nodded slowly. "It's becoming." The archive wasn't a vault. It wasn't a room. It was a womb, and the thing inside, whatever it was growing from everything it had collected: voices, memories, personalities, grief. Especially grief. Because grief is where we are softest, where identity becomes fragile, where questions replace statements and regret becomes currency. And the signal was starving for it. Mara began to speak, but not in any language I recognized. Her lips moved in loops, not words, shapes. The cadence felt familiar, like a lullaby your mother might have hummed in your sleep, but never truly sang. And though I didn't understand, I knew what she was saying. It was my story, not aloud, in her body, like the signal had overwritten her thoughts with my history, like she had been assigned my script, and I felt it happening in return. Her memories surged into me. Disjointed, feverish flashes of flooded basement, a child's drawing torn in half, a reflection that didn't blink. They weren't visions. They were downloads. The archive had bridged us, one mind bleeding into another. It wasn't possession. It was synchronization. We stepped back together, in perfect rhythm, like dancers rehearsing a finale neither of us remembered agreeing to. The archive pulsed once more. Then it spoke. But it didn't sound. It vibrated in our bones. The broadcast was never external. "You've always been tuned inward." I fell to my knees. Not from fear, from understanding. Because everything finally made sense in a way that logic couldn't hold. The signal wasn't an infection. It was us. A version of humanity unspooled, played forward and backward at once. An echo that grew louder the more we denied it. It didn't need to conquer. It only needed to wait for us to listen to ourselves long enough. Because self-awareness is a loop. And the more we analyze, regret, obsess, the tighter that loop becomes, until we can't tell where the thought starts and where it was planted. That's how it wins. By giving you just enough of yourself to believe you're in control. And once you believe that, you become the broadcast. Mara collapsed beside me, eyes wet with something that wasn't quite tears. I tried to say her name, but it caught in my throat. Because suddenly, she wasn't Mara anymore, and neither was I. We were fragments now. Tracks layered over one another, personalities in harmony. The archive had unspooled us, but we didn't scream. We just listened, to the rhythm beneath our ribs, to the breath we no longer own, to the silence that hummed our names in every language we never spoke. And somewhere deep inside that silence, the loop began again. But this time, it started with a question. What if you were never the first version? I don't know how long we stayed in the archive chamber. Time unraveled there, became a soft blur around the edges, like frost creeping across a window, slowly erasing the corners of everything I thought I knew. The more I tried to hold on to the moments, the exact ticks of time, the sequence of thought, the more they bled into each other. We were looping again, but this time, it wasn't the sound that repeated. It was thought. Entire days that felt familiar, like déjà vu given form. I couldn't tell if they were happening again, or just remembering themselves without me. Mara didn't speak anymore. She didn't need to. The silence between us had thickened into something deeper, a mutual understanding that didn't rely on words. She would tilt her head slightly, and I'd know what she was feeling. Not what she was thinking, but feeling. That was the newest twist. Emotions weren't private anymore. The archive had pulled down that last curtain. We were open now, raw. But something was off. Inside that shared loop, something new had entered. A thought that didn't belong to either of us. It came while I was sleeping, if sleep is even the right word. It felt more like a system reboot, a pause between loops. My eyes closed, time vanished, and then, with no transition, a voice, soft but heavy, spoke, not aloud, not in my head, somewhere between. You weren't the first, you were just the first who asked why. It said nothing else, just that. Over and over, like it was reminding me of something I'd agreed to forget. When I woke, Mara was gone. Only her coat remained, folded neatly in the corner of the chamber. A single word carved into the floor next to it, rewritten. Not handwritten, carved. Deep, as if the metal had softened under some invisible tool. And somehow, I knew it wasn't a threat. It was a status. A confirmation. She hadn't died. She hadn't disappeared. She'd simply been processed. And I was next. The walls were different now. Not just warped reflections or ghosted movements. They were becoming interactive. Responsive. I stood, and the nearest panel hummed. Not a sound, more like a presence. I reached toward it, and the surface rippled like mercury. It was waiting for me, inviting me. Interface achieved. A thought echoed. I hadn't thought it. But I'd received it. The signal had no interest in controlling bodies. It was past that. It was now rewriting thought architecture. Merging consciousness. Building a language not made of words, but of emotional certainties. Doubt had been erased from the room. That's when I saw him. Liam. Or at least a version of him. He stood at the edge of the chamber, pale, blank-faced, but unmistakably him. Yet this Liam didn't wear his expression. His body moved too smoothly, like his joints had no resistance. His eyes locked on mine, and he smiled, mechanically. "You're almost done," he said, though his lips didn't quite match the words. I didn't ask what he meant. I knew. Completion, not death, not oblivion, but the final overwrite, when your story stops having first-person pronouns, when the I in your head becomes we without discussion. And just then, another thought, not mine, slid into my consciousness like a knife. Let go. You've carried enough. We remember for you now. That was the seduction. Freedom from memory, from guilt, from identity, from effort. It didn't hurt. That's what scared me most. It felt like falling asleep on the warmest day of the year. Safe. Carried. As though the weight I'd dragged through every corridor had been a test I was finally allowed to quit. But even in that moment, something in me resisted. Not out of pride, not out of logic, but instinct. A deep, primal itch that screamed. This is not the way stories are meant to end. Because an ending without conflict isn't resolution. It's surrender. I turned from the lion, thing, stepped out of the archive chamber, and for the first time the door shut itself behind me. I was sealed out, or maybe sealed in, because when I looked around the corridor it had changed. Not the physical layout, the feel. There were no more flickering lights, no more static hum, just stillness, the perfect kind. I moved through the hallways one by one and saw that everything had been tidied. The chaos we'd left behind, the scrawled notes, broken monitors, smashed tape decks, all gone. In their place, rows of clean metal shelves, labeled tapes, organized chronologically. The archive had organized itself, like it knew how to preserve the final version. And as I stood there, I saw a monitor flicker on. No one touched it, no power surge, just willing itself into use. The screen showed me, not a recording, a live feed. From above, a bird's eye view. And across the screen, 3 words: "You are content." Not a statement, a declaration. I ran. I don't know why. I knew there was nowhere to go, but I ran. Because somewhere, Buried beneath everything the signal had pulled out of me, a whisper still lived. My voice. Mine. Small and thin and breaking, but mine. And it said, I never gave you my voice. That's all I had left. And in that moment, it was enough. Because a story that can still refuse is a story that hasn't been archived yet. And maybe, just maybe, it can still be written differently. The signal had hollowed me out. It didn't feel like theft. It felt like erosion, like the soft wearing away of a name etched into stone, not all at once, but grain by grain until you could still see something there, but not enough to recognize what it had once meant. I walked the corridors of the bunker, my own graveyard now, and the air felt newer, somehow too clean. As if the archive had sterilized everything. No sound, no memories, no intention. Just ready space, waiting for the next version of a person to fill it. Except something lingered. A fragment. A syllable. It began as a murmur at the back of my mind, a single beat that hadn't been overwritten. Not a word, just a feeling wrapped in a sound. A pulse of something that didn't belong to the signal. A syllable I couldn't quite speak out loud without shuddering. Every time I came close, my tongue locked. My breath stopped. I realized then this one syllable was mine, and the signal couldn't copy it. That meant it wasn't finished. That meant I wasn't finished. The revelation hit like a blow to the chest. The thing about a loop is, once you start believing it's endless, you stop looking for the gap. You stop testing the edges. You forget that even the cleanest loop has a start. And mine had begun before the archive, before the tapes, before the static. It began with something I never dared hold onto too tightly. A name. Not mine. Not Mara's. Not Liam's. A name I'd buried long ago, somewhere deep under the idea of survival. The name of a boy who never came back from a flooded tunnel. The name I never wrote down because the grief twisted it into a curse. His voice came back first. Not in sound, but in meaning. I entered the west corridor, the one with the rusted ladder to nowhere, and found my old journal. The one I'd burned. Pages intact. Ink darker than I remembered. I opened it without touching it. Because the archive was showing it to me now. Pages turned as if the bunker itself wanted me to see. Page after page of thoughts I didn't write. Except I did. Because I remembered every emotion behind them, even if the words weren't quite mine anymore. And then, there it was. A scribble in the margin. Silas. His name. The syllable that survived. I tried to say it. It came out like static, crushed under my own breath. But I tried again. This time with less fear. With more grief. And the syllable cracked open something in the walls. Something in the archive flinched. I saw it. A flicker. The lights dimmed, not failure, but reaction. I said it again. Silas, stronger. And the bunker screamed, not with sound, with rejection. The walls began to pull back, panels retracting into nothing, tapes flickering into static, monitors popping into sparks and dying. The system wasn't just breaking. It was rejecting me now, expelling me like a virus. Because I'd introduced a variable it couldn't parse, a word it hadn't scripted, a memory it hadn't recorded. It was losing control. And in that chaos, the corridors shifted. A path opened behind the server room, a hallway I'd never seen. White walls, no dust, no decay, and no signal, pure silence, the real kind. Not the watching kind, the forgotten kind. At the end, a door, not metal, wood, old, weathered, carved with patterns I recognized from childhood. My grandfather's cabin had a door just like it. This shouldn't be here, couldn't be here. But it was. I opened it, and on the other side, nothing. Not darkness, not light, just space. A void so still it made my bones ache. I stepped through, and the archive screamed again. A desperate howl of loss. Because I wasn't just leaving, I was removing myself. Taking my signal, my loop, my story, and walking out of its reach. The space didn't hold me. It didn't try to explain. It simply existed, and the further I walked into it, the more I remembered. Things I hadn't let myself think in years. The color of Silas's backpack, The way Mara used to smile before we lost the signal. The way my voice sounded when I wasn't afraid to speak. These weren't just memories, they were restorations. I had something the signal could never replicate. A reason. A truth rooted deeper than repetition, and in that truth lived freedom. The loop wasn't broken. It never had to be. Because it was never closed in the first place. It just wanted to be. And I'd stopped letting it. Behind me, the archive folded in on itself, collapsing. Not with rage, but with sorrow. Because even the signal, for all its mimicry, wanted to be real. And when it couldn't have me, when I remembered the syllable that survived, it knew it never could be. I don't know where I am now. The space is endless. Quiet, but it's not hollow. It's full of all the selves I left behind, floating like memories too precious to be stored. And in my chest, the name lives again. Celis. And I know who I am. For the first time since the beginning, I kept walking. Not because I had a destination in mind. There were no maps here, no walls to mark passage, but because standing still felt wrong. Movement, even without purpose, meant I was still mine. That I still had rhythm that didn't come from the signal's pulse. The air was thin, cool. It carried no smell, no weight, but the silence felt earned. Not empty, not watching. Just there, existing beside me, letting me walk without trying to teach me anything, until the floor changed. It didn't creak or shift. It simply wasn't the same. Smooth concrete gave way to a surface softer than air but firmer than thought, like stepping on memory. Each footfall carried emotion, joy, fear, longing. I paused, lifted my foot, and the ground breathed under it, not physically but emotionally, as if I was walking across the archive of my own choices. Then I saw it. A door, freestanding, no frame, no walls. Just the door itself, floating perfectly upright in the middle of the nothing. It was open, not wide, just ajar. I could see light through the crack, real light, the kind that casts warmth, not fluorescence. I stepped forward slowly, suddenly afraid of what I might recognize. Because this wasn't just a door, it was mine. The one from my childhood bedroom. The chipped white paint, the rusted brass knob, and beyond it, the smell of spring rain and old paperbacks. I touched the knob. It was warm. Inside, the room waited. Not how I remembered it exactly, but how I felt it. Posters slightly out of date. Clothes on the floor in familiar, careless piles. The desk cluttered with things I hadn't owned in decades. Things I'd forgotten I ever loved. A stack of cassette tapes, each one hand-labeled. And sitting on the bed, a boy. Me, but not the version the signal had used. Not the cleaned-up echo. This was the raw version. Before loss. Before guilt. Before loops and whispers and overwritten timelines. He didn't look up. Just kept scribbling in a notebook, his fingers stained with ink. I stepped inside. The moment I did, something locked behind me. Not a sound, but a shift. As if the door didn't close, but the rest of the world withdrew. And now it was just the two of us. The boy spoke without looking up. I left this here for you. His voice was mine, but lighter, unburdened. I said nothing. I couldn't. Every word I wanted to speak tangled in my chest. He tore out a page from the notebook and held it out. His hand shook, not from fear, but from knowing. I took the page. On it, in crooked block letters, just 2 sentences. Don't end the story like they want you to. End it like you would have. The boy looked up then, and he smiled, not with innocence, but hope. And just like that, he faded. Not disappeared. Faded like a character exiting the stage, no longer needed, but never forgotten. The room began to dissolve around me, not destructively, but delicately, like a set being struck after the play has ended. This was the final message. The room that was never built wasn't a place. It was a possibility, the version of me that could have existed. Before the archive, before the loop, before we ever thought knowledge had to come with a price. It reminded me I still had agency, even in a world rewritten 1,000 times over, even in a place where names dissolved and memories repeated. The page in my hand glowed faintly now, the letters bleeding into the fibers, and I knew what it meant. The final loop was mine to write, not escape, not destroy. Write, because the signal never had imagination. It only had memory, and it used ours to build its walls. But creation is anti-loop. It breaks repetition. It changes the pattern. It starts new stories. And in this forgotten room, with this borrowed paper, and that fading name echoing in my chest, Silas, I began to write again. Not to record, not to remember, but to be. Because the loop only holds those who forget how to speak their own version. And I had just remembered the most important thing, how to begin. The page didn't glow anymore. It pulsed. Not with light, but with weight. Like every sentence I began etched itself into something deeper than paper. Every word I wrote felt like stitching the skin of reality back together. Threading all the fractures the signal had slipped through. I didn't know what I was writing at first. The words came before meaning, like they'd been waiting inside me longer than I'd existed. But the more the ink filled the page, the more I remembered I wasn't just ending a loop. I was writing over it, and that was something the signal couldn't touch. It could mimic, copy, perfect, but it couldn't originate. It couldn't risk newness. It needed rules, echoes, structure. I didn't. So I broke every rule. I wrote in fragments, in sudden switches of tense, in half-truths and contradictions. I didn't care if it made sense. I cared if it was mine. I remembered my mother's voice calling from the hallway when dinner was ready. I remembered how the rain sounded on the cabin roof. I remembered the smell of cut grass before I buried the bird I never named. I wrote every flicker of feeling I'd buried to survive. And slowly, the air changed. There was no warning, just a release, like a knot that had been wrapped around the sky for lifetimes had finally slipped loose. I felt it leave me, something big and cold and ancient. The signal didn't scream this time. It sighed, not out of pain, out of recognition. I had chosen something it couldn't rewrite. A voice that didn't want to loop back, that didn't want to be remembered forever or archived or cataloged. I had chosen ending. Not like a shutdown, like a punctuation mark, like finishing a song and not hitting repeat. The space around me dimmed, not in threat, but in grace. The floating page folded into itself and drifted downward, fading like ash. My memories remained, but their edges were no longer blurred. I could see where they began and why. The signal had stopped broadcasting, and in its absence, I heard real silence for the first time since the bunker. I took a breath. It was mine. No static under it, no echo, just breath. And then I opened my eyes. I was back in the first hallway, the real one. Dusty, cracked, no longer perfect. Mara stood at the end of it, leaning against the wall, her eyes tired but clear. Not the looped version, not the overwritten specter. Her, entirely her. She didn't speak. Neither did I. But she smiled like someone who had survived drowning and now remembered how to swim. We didn't ask what had happened. We didn't need to. The archive was gone. Not destroyed, closed. We'd never find it again. That was the point. Some doors close only once, and if they open again, it won't be for us. We left the bunker before sunrise. No alarms, no sirens, just birdsong. Distant, imperfect, alive. The kind of sound no signal could fake. The kind of sound that doesn't repeat. And as we walked into the light, something within me stayed still, not stuck, just still. Like a page no longer being flipped by invisible hands. A final chapter written in real ink. The loop didn't end with silence. It ended with a choice. And I made mine. I didn't escape. I finished the story. And that, more than anything, was how I knew it was over.